Hey now, everybody. We're here. Oh, you turned the fire off, Adam. I was going to say we're here with our resident pro-Palestinian protester.
Free Palestine!
Oh, terrible. Adam Fredden.
I'm so happy that I'm a part of this one. It's the best way to start it. I'm going to clip that.
Look, at least we know we'll be monetized if I scream "Free Palestine" at the end, at the beginning of the video.
There you
right?
go. There you go. And of course, we're joined by our good friends Rudyard of WhatIfAltHist and Phil Labonte. How you guys doing today?
Hi. Hello.
What's
How you
up?
doing, Rudyard?
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course.
We were going to talk about Rudyard's video on the coming incel revolution. But is there anything else you guys want to say before we
before
get
we
into that? Yeah.
First of all, I'm sorry for this very nerdy digression, but is your last name Labonte or Labonte?
I pronounce it Labonte, so it's as Americanized as you can get of a French name.
Yeah,
Nice.
I guess you're probably French Canadian ancestry because Labonte is French for of good luck.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why do you know this?
I speak French.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well,
So
before
it was the goodness, or the goodness was the way that I was told.
Yeah.
It was
Mhm.
One of my least favorite people was named Lamont, and so those two names are stuck in my head.
I'll avoid being like the Lamont, and I'll be like the.
I mean, that's what
Labonte.
Destiny called you, and so like when you posted that was my immediate thought. He's not Lamont.
Oh. Yeah. So want to hear a real quick funny thing. So today, actually, I want to announce this. We announced the tour that we're doing this summer is announced. We're going on tour with Megadeth and Mudvayne. It starts in
Nice.
in August, and it goes until the end of September. So it's like 33 dates, doing all major markets. So tickets go on sale on Friday. So make sure you check out allthatremainsonline.com, or you can check out, I think, megadeth.com to get tickets. You can join Megadeth's like free advanced club thing, and you can get tickets, I think, 12 hours early or a day early. So yeah, that's cool. So that's what I wanted to announce.
Oh,
And
nice.
bringing up Destiny kind of reminded me of the fact that I wanted to, because the whole, like, someone said, Phil, you should try and get Dave to like do something. And I'm like, if I try to get Dave to do something, that's me doing exactly what Destiny thought I was doing to him. That would be the bad green room behavior.
Yeah.
I was
It's
like, hey, Dave, come get on this podcast. Dave Mustaine, the guy that, was nice enough to allow my band to be on his tour. Let me go ahead and run up there and try and get you to do more stuff for me. Never mind the fact that you let me be a part of this huge tour. Thank you. Let me go ahead and ask for a little extra. That's bad green room behavior, not what Destiny thought.
The content creator drama now is crazy. So you've had Destiny with his various podcast issues. You've had Vouch with his pedophilia stuff. You've had Hassan with saying he would self-delete for having 40% less viewership 1 month. You have Candace Owens leaving the Daily Wire. You have some Jordan Peterson drama. You have and then you have Ben
the Crowder
Shapiro
drama,
having a lot of Israel drama. So everyone in the content creator space, barring Phil and his Tim Pool cast and myself, is having drama.
Yeah.
Whoa, and us. We have no drama.
No.
You're
good boys.
You guys just started. You guys just started, don't you, Adam?
What drama did I start?
You just start drama in the responses. You make remarks about Destiny, and then when I reply, that's what sets it off.
Oh, you're right. I was.
I know.
Yeah, I remember. I was involved in that. Look, but that spawned the greatest Destiny clip of all time.
It did.
Destiny
I'm so
acting
glad.
like a retard. Yeah.
Today was the first time I took that down since it went up as my pinned tweet when it actually happened. But I have to promote the tour now, so I have to leave the just fun stuff, and I want to make sure that people know that we're going out and doing stuff. But that was my pinned tweet for a while, because Destiny, man.
Oh, he nailed it.
Yeah. He nailed it.
he went the full radio, man.
He did. It was great. I love it. I'm so happy.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway,
so yes. Anyways,
Sitch, do you wanna say anything
Well,
before we start?
before we get into the incel stuff, I guess it is related too, because we're talking about like revolution. You were talking, Rudyard, about, Main Adam streamed yesterday on the pro-Palestinian, sometimes pro-Hamas protests that are going on college campuses.
Sometimes what?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, listen, I'm gonna
Yeah.
try to be good faith Gary here.
You're
And you
so
were saying that
charitable.
this was, I know, and you were saying that this was indicative of some kind of craziness that we live
Yeah.
in.
Um, Before this podcast started, we were talking about uh, these guys released a video a few days ago about the pro-Palestine protests at Columbia. And watching that podcast, it's just insane to see what was happening because if I were to write a science fiction novel about America spiraling into civil war, I would have written exactly what happened at Columbia. And I liked that you guys referenced John Haidt because it's so perfect an emblem. It's so perfect a sign of the kind of stuff Haidt talks about, where humans have these ingrained cultish habits, where you can see these leftists, they were securing a sacred space, they were chanting things in unison in like shared words. Then they were talking about like the revolution must be in our hearts forever. Even when university is done, you have to have the revolution in your heart. And it's just like, man, this is a cult. And it's just weird to watch people who have been propagandized since childhood. Don't be a Nazi. Don't be cultish. Be an individual. The second you let them out of the cradle, they're doing this.
And it's even sillier because, like, and we're gonna probably do a video on it today or tomorrow. There's a bunch of people who are now defending the protesters and
Yeah.
criticizing the campus for trying to stop them. And they keep saying there's like this meme talking point. They keep saying like, "Oh, I didn't see any of the protesters advocating, anti-Semitic things. I didn't see that any of the protesters doing anything crazy. They're just advocating for the genocide and Gaza to stop." And it's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
here's the compilation of all the people acting totally crazy.
Yeah, you could,
Yeah.
but those kind of compilations, they don't move people because there's the compilations of both, whether it be Democrats or Republicans denying elections, and both sides will point at the
Right.
other and say, look at all these people we have a 2 minute long thing of Democrats denying elections, and listen to all the times that Donald Trump denied election. I literally just went through it yesterday. I did a podcast with my friend Doc. He's the guitar player for Bad Wolves, and he's got a podcast called the X-Men, and he does a lot of music stuff, but sometimes he'll touch on politics stuff, and he generally is more left leaning, significantly more left leaning than me. He says he's center left, but he's also in California, so I think that he's center left in compared to California,
Hmm.
which puts him a little
Hey,
further
hey,
left
hey.
than most people, I think. I'm only talking about perspective. I'm not talking about good or bad or anything there. So,
Right.
but yeah, so he's pretty left leaning, and he was doing the same thing about, well, Donald Trump did this, and he's right. It's not that he's wrong. It's just that it's very much, you see the people that are tribal becoming tribal regardless of whether they're on the right or the left. You see that
Hmm.
the tribal tendencies really starting to, I mean, not that America hasn't been polarized, but as the intensity gets more, intent, or as it gets, the heat builds up or whatever, as we get closer to the election and stuff. And also just the 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 right getting some traction when it comes to the pushback, and seeing, the results of some of the things the right has been predicting, and seeing those things starting to manifest in reality. And people that are generally actually moderate, disliking that stuff, like you and, I would say, you and Sitch, or both you and Adam, are, generally centered and a little on the left side, but like, you guys clearly see the problems, and I think it's starting to manifest for more people to see.
That's because we
Hmm.
don't do the tribalism stuff, obviously.
Sure.
Tribalism makes you lose massive IQ points.
It makes me
Yeah.
think two things. The first is that I just removed any assumption that the left has a moral code. Every time you do that, you get proven wrong. And just at this point, you should not assume the left has any moral code that it will ever hold itself to. And they're acting purely out of self-interest. And I don't think a lot of people have emotionally processed that yet. Um,
Do
and
you
the
think that
second
that's
thing,
because of, don't you think that's because of the philosophy of the left, though? Like, where the
yeah,
where the foundation comes from?
I mean, yeah, totally. They're communists. And looking at that clip yesterday, decades of them saying we're not communists was thrown out the window watching that clip, because I just finished reading a really fascinating book, and I'll say the clickbait version. I can explain more if you'd like. It's called Fire in the Minds of Men, and it's written by the former guy who ran the Congressional Library. And the thesis of the book is that the modern left in communism is a descendant of the Illuminati and the occult movements of the 19th century. I can explain that if you'd like me to. And I prefaced it was written by a congressional librarian because it's so insane that you'd think that some guy on 4chan would have made this up. But with all of this, if you look at their roots, they don't have a moral code. It's just whatever needs to happen for the revolution. And I was reading this book and watching those clips. You can tell I can read communist at this point. They're saying certain words that mean something to them and something different to someone else. And so I could hear all these words they're saying, and they're so overtly communist. And I mean, it's one of those things where if you're not a wise person, the left comes across as caring and affectionate and all that sort of thing. But if you actually understand their philosophy, you realize that that's just a front for incredible bloodthirstiness.
Well, when you say the left doesn't have a moral code, do you think everyone on the left, or are you just talking about communists and socialists?
So I'm really talking at communists, where I think there are people, and there's purposeful obfuscation of terms going on here, where liberal, communist, conservative, these can all mean different things, and that's on purpose to confuse people so that the people on the left can reach their goals more easily. And I think liberals have a social code, and there's a distinction between left and liberal, even though it's been purposely confused. Liberals, as in people like Sam Harris or Brett Weinstein, or that
Bill
group of
Maher.
people. Yeah, Bill Maher. I think they actually, when I say moral code, I mean a list of principles that they can assess themselves through to see if they're doing something wrong. Where if Bill Maher or Brett Weinstein or any of these people, if their faction does something wrong, they have some kind of list of principles to say, hey, you're in the wrong. For communists, they will never admit wrong. Every single thing they do is rationalized as somehow in the interests of the class rebellion. And so you can't hold communists to any standards or expect any degree of honesty or for them to uphold their side of the bargain. And you can't fundamentally deal with players like that.
And you also can't, one thing that I want to add, I totally agree with everything Red you're saying, but I want to add that you can't expect a communist today, and this is something that the right does expect. You can't expect the communist today to look like a Soviet, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they might dress up like that, and there are some tankies that get into that imagery. But a modern communist is not going to look like a Soviet. They're probably not going to be expounding as much Marx as they're going to be expounding postmodern ideas, because that's where communism is kind of led to. And that's where it had to go, because once the theory was tested in reality enough, so all the things that were attempted in the Soviet Union and China and all of the communist countries that have happened or that have been attempted, once it failed and basically ran into reality, they had to stop saying that it was the scientific thing, because it used to be, oh, socialism is scientific and that's where science is going to take us, and we'll see in the future once everybody's up to speed with the science and blah blah blah. And it failed miserably. So it moved away from science and it moved into more of a romantic kind of philosophy, which is more about feelings. And we believe that the revolution is good, and we believe in the revolution, and the revolution is in your heart. And then, so it became a much more postmodern and less focused on the Enlightenment kind of philosophy, I suppose, would be the best way to say it.
Just to play a bit of devil's advocate here, a lot of the things that you're saying, I don't see how they don't apply to the right as well. I mean, they're talking about, draining the swamp is kind of a revolutionary action. So there are kinds of things that are very similar. Also, like even if it isn't practical, I do think like a lot of the leftist philosophy is just idealistic to the point of impracticability. isn't radical equality, or like this ends justifies the means, that isn't that a moral code? I mean, it's a moral code I wouldn't agree with, but to say that it's not like a moral code with principles doesn't seem accurate to me.
You guys have a bunch of threads, and so I'm going to try to hit all of them. My assessment for a moral code is it has to have a system in which you can be assessed for not rationalizing. And so if whatever your goals are, you can achieve them through whatever it aims. You just don't have a moral code. Your moral code is I lack a moral code. But if you have a list of principles through which you can assess yourself against to see that you are incorrect, that's what I think a moral code is. And another idea I teased out.
So just to make it clear, so you're saying the moral code is kind of the system that you use to work towards something. It's not necessarily the end result of whatever your goal is. Okay, so, that's interesting.
Yeah, imagine you're driving. Imagine I have to walk across the swamps of Louisiana, and I can either just walk across the swamps of Louisiana, or I can have a list of principles where I'm not going to walk across rivers that have alligators. I'm not going to walk down, I'm not going to walk past certain mangrove swamps. And so you're trying to attain this goal, but through attaining that goal, a moral code establishes standards that you hold yourself to.
Adam, can I interject here 1 second? Adam, do you consider a moral code the goal or a framework? Because when I think of a moral code, I think of it as a framework. So you're looking for a certain ends, and the moral code allows you to decide which means are acceptable and which means are unacceptable. So I want to get money, right? So because I have a moral code that says stealing is wrong, I have to come up with some way to get people to voluntarily give me their money, whether it be providing a service, working for them, whatever. But my moral code does not allows for me to get money, but it doesn't allow for me to get money by beating people up and taking their money, right? That's how I think of a moral code.
I agree with
that. Is that how you
conceptualize
it too, Adam?
I think of a moral system as a set of rules that guides behavior. I do think when you put certain goals on society, that obviously is going to guide some behavior, because you're going to want to maximize behaviors that work towards that end goal. So there's a little bit of back and forth there. But just if your moral system is going to have the ends justify the means is a rule in your moral system, then you are going to have like a lot of wide latitude to do things that might be distasteful in other moral systems. I think that's why most people throw that out of their moral system. They're like, look, we can't do heinous things to achieve radical equality. And this is why communism fails on so many levels, because they are willing to do kind of heinous things to achieve this end goal. So, but I'm always curious, what is the best way to attack that moral system? Because I mean, I agree with Rudyard, and you probably agree as well, Phil, that a lot of this is just being driven by root gut emotion, and people contradict themselves all the time. These emotions didn't evolve to make us consistent. They evolved to make us inconsistent. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which nature really is an ends justifies the means kind of environment. So it's interesting that our moral codes are so different from nature. I think that's what separates humanity from nature.
Yes.
Well, let me just say something on this moral code issue. I mean, even though I know we're sort of stem deep in Sitch's law of arguing definitions.
Oh yeah. It's no big deal though.
No, I know, but I think
I don't feel like we're arguing. I feel like we're trying to understand each other.
I know. I know. When I say arguing, I just mean like debating it, discussing it,
talking about it. Yeah.
You fucker. No. So the socialists right now, I do think that they have a moral code in terms of like they have a framework of beliefs that they're operating under, and it seems hypocritical to us as people that are operating under like the liberal individual rights framework of believing in a universal set of principles based on, individual rights, where they're operating kind of on the soul, like the whole P plus P equals R, the oppressor oppressee hierarchy. And so I don't think they're being hypocritical under their own framework. They're just viewing it, their framework is just hypocritical to our framework. As long as they're taking the side of who they deem as the oppressor, they're always on essentially the right side of things. Now, this is a horrible moral framework, but that's what they're operating under.
What I would retort is that there is never a point where Mao and Stalin can be wrong. If you're the communist dictator, the irony is that in the 60s and 50s, communist countries had higher rates of inequality than Western capitalist countries. And so there is no place where the communist dictator will ever have an answer to be no for is this morally permissible. And so if it was a reflection of their actual value system, you would see, like Hassan, for example, if the communists actually followed their moral code, Hassan would not be allowed to buy that $2.5 million mansion. That and the fact that all the leftists defended him, or Hassan defending Pokimane for selling her cookies overpriced, the left defending those actions means that if the left had a moral code, those actions would not be permissible inside said moral code. But the fact they tolerated it means they don't have a moral code.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to defend, socialist or socialist regimes being hypocritical in that way. And obviously, I think people generally are hypocritical or permissive. I mean, it's kind of the whole Heidian tribalism, binds and blinds. It's easy to blind yourself from the shortcomings of your tribe and hyper focus on the shortcomings of the other tribe. I don't know. I wouldn't say that's just not a unique thing to the left. I mean, I think you could throw the same critique at Donald Trump. Definitely not someone who seems to have lived his life according to social conservatism. I mean, right now, this whole, he cheated on his wife multiple times thing, and yet he seems to get a pass on, anything that's not considered socially conservative because it's like for the cause at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are differing degrees to this, where in almost all debates you run into an issue where people use whataboutisms, and for each side, they do bad things, but the gradation matters in every single thing. And so, for example, in medieval Europe with the Crusades, the Crusaders did atrocities, but then these provoked introspection and changes back in Europe. Or for example, when Charlemagne conquered the Anglo-Saxons, his ministers back in the capital didn't like those policies, and so there was introspection that some moral principle had been violated. And I think that for both the right and the left, you have people who are more classical liberal towards the center, and then you have people who are more of radicals who do not have a moral code the further out you go. And I think the further right you actually get a tremendous amount of similarities with the left ideologically. You have racial victim narratives. You have removal of what's fundamentally a Christian moral code. You've lost the concept of free will, and your moral status stems from your birth. There's this idea of revolutionary struggle and about 15 other things. And one of the things Hayek wrote in the 30s is he said, the real enemy to a communist is the real enemy to a Nazi or a communist are not the other Nazi and the communist. Because an ironic thing is that it was pretty easy for Nazis and communists to recruit future members from the other because the psychologies of Nazis and communists were pretty close. The person who they could never recruit was the classical liberal.
Right. It was funny because Brianna Wu had a tweet, I think it was today or yesterday that I retweeted, where she was basically talking about how, a lot of the socialist rhetoric about colonialism is just like the left-wing version of blood and soil from the Nazis.
Yeah, exactly.
It's 100% that.
Right. And it makes sense, especially when you look at like fascism and socialism kind of both derived from, I think, Surrealism, and they just seem to be kind of like the mirror images of each other, and they're both responses to liberalism. So
yeah, we want to get into
Dev, this Short Fat Otaku has done some great videos. Like you said, you put up the thing, Sitch, the videos that he has showing the similarities between like the far left and the far right. They're almost like they're essential viewing for people that are going to even, that are interested in this stuff at all. Like it's a great way to give people the information. It's not too deep. It's, they're usually 20, whatever minute, 20, 30 minutes or whatever. They're not, overbearing.
Right.
What are you smirking at there, Adam?
It's Dev. It's not too deep. It's just, very surface.
I love Dev. I think Dev is great.
Very
I
surface
all
level, very easy to understand if you're retarded.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's good. Perfect. It's perfect for dummies such as myself.
I'm just joking.
I yell at a
I'm
stick
joking.
for a living, brother.
Yeah.
So
I'm joking. But so speaking of,
I just want to say before we move, the thing that's going on, I don't know if it was James Lindsay said this, someone said this, it was kind of like the big thing that's going on right now is it's really shouldn't be left versus right. It's really collectivism versus individualism.
yes.
And that's kind of what's going on right now. And the left broadly, the non-socialist left in America, the liberals need to have an understanding. And I think they are, because I even saw MSNBC report on this. I've seen CNN report on this, the New York Times report on this. There does seem to be like these pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protests on campuses do seem to be alerting the liberals that the kids are not all right. And they do need to wake up to this idea that these are not the liberals' kids of yesteryear. These are, socialists. These are collectivists. They don't agree with your moral principles.
They were the schools failed. They failed to teach liberal principles. They allowed socialists to take over, and you've taught principles that are not Enlightenment principles. People that their feelings are more important than what reality is, and I mean it's bad. It's a bad news. It's a bad situation, and you've got like multiple graduating classes of people that have that opinion have gone out into places of consequence and gotten jobs. They're they're in the media, they're in government, they're people that believe completely fallacious things in places of employment that matter. It's bad news. Anyways,
sorry. The first thing this makes me think of is one of the worst flaws of our thinking today is we try to structure things into binaries or yes or no options. And so people will be like right versus left, collectivism versus individualism, Christian versus communist, whatever. The reality is this giant swirling vortex of infinite communication and factions just competing with each other. And so if you look at the Middle East now, imagine explaining the Middle East politics. So you're like, there's this Sunni separatist group in Syria, but they're fighting another Sunni separatist group with a slightly different group of Islam. And there's the Shias, then the Russians are funding this faction. And when you look at the Middle East, you can see that this is absurdly complicated. But I think America.
But Tiffany knows. Tiffany knows.
Yeah. And so in American politics, we don't do that, but I think it's the reality. And as a person who's part of the digital right, I see like 15 different factions that are fighting for supremacy right now, and I guess it's similar on the left. And you do have to default onto things like the right or the left because they are useful for certain intellectual things. Like if we do have a civil war, it is going to be a civil war between the right and the left, and these factions will unify to fight the other side. But I think especially now we're in an era of profound confusion where no one has any idea what's going on. And so just a lot of crazy stuff is happening. I think we're in a place of chaos where a bunch of trajectories can happen. And decisions made now will determine which of those 20 trajectories occur. And the second point, and this leads into the incel conversation, is I don't think people have taken politics seriously since World War II. I think most of the population has thought, we're in The Simpsons now, we're in a John Hughes movie, we're in a quiet American suburbia, end of history, nothing bad happens. We can just smoke. I was going to say smoke beers. We can just smoke beers and drink burgers and not have to worry. And the reason the left won is because the rest of the populace had no comprehension that people could be as cynical as the left in today's society, where the left, because no one else was watching, took over all of society's institutions. And I would think fundamentally, it's because the left was powered by mentally unwell people who, in a society where everyone was taken care of by financial prosperity, the mentally unwell people were the ones you could motivate to take over society. But the problem now is that if you talk to the normies, And I've been to a bunch of like business conferences and stuff. And if you talk to someone from, let's say, some 50-year-old guy runs a company, the company has a bunch of government contracts. If you tell them about the incel revolution, and if even until yesterday, if you told them colleges are run by literal communists trying to destroy society, they just laugh it off and say, "Yeah, I did
Right.
some crazy stuff when I was a kid." But you have to pull them over, and they're still not going to listen and be like, "No, this isn't like when you were a kid. This is serious." But the populace doesn't view anything that happens now as serious.
Yeah, it's because it's interesting because, I know a lot of people have been talking about this threat of the young socialists kind of taking over and for like, I don't know, 8, 9 years, maybe 10 years. And a lot of people on the left would poo-poo it as like, oh, they're just crazy college kids.
They
And
still
then,
poo-poo it.
I know they do, but like right now it's like, okay, now you see those kids, because it was 10 years ago. Now you see like all these corporations have basically been sucked into following all this DI nonsense, which is all rooted in some kind of weird race Marxism. And it's like, oh, okay. So is it still just on college campuses? You're seeing all these companies basically manifest this ideology. And then you look at the college campuses and it's just amplified. It's now even worse than it was, back then. So it is kind of an interesting thing. But I want to go back to sort of the end of history thing. Do you think it's like the end of World War II, or is it the end of, or really not the end of, but the fall of the Soviet Union? Because I'm assuming like, I wasn't alive back then, but through that time period, it seemed like a
Yeah.
lot of Americans were still hyper fixated on like the Cold War and communists. And then
Yeah.
once that all kind of fell away, it's like, oh, we won. And we kind of sat back and we're just like,
Yeah.
yep, get stuffed, world.
I think it was a gradual process where after World War II, there stopped being a idea that there was inner American disunity. And so I've
Mm,
read a bunch of pre-World War II histories, and in those, like if you read a history of America written in 1930, they don't talk about America as a single country. They'll say the Southerners are like this, New England's like this, the Midwest's like this. And so there's this concept that America, this competing group of different self-interests, like the Catholics or Black people or different states.
mhm,
And with World War II, we went through this process of standardization. And one of the points I think about a lot is that the idea that woke people can say whites are oppressed, whites are the oppressor. It shocks me to say that they say whites, because if you were to go back 100 years ago, there were no group. The idea of putting all white Americans in the same category would be ridiculous. My dad's a baby boomer. When he was growing up, Irish Americans were still considered to be an ethnic minority. So the
mhm.
South was a different country. And so the idea that we would put Jews as white 100 years ago, that would be incredibly insane. And so around World War II, you develop this concept that all Americans are this uniform block cheese. And so after that, the Cold War, you have this notion that the communists are gone because America was kept together by fighting this goal of global communism. But then once communism was gone, you globalized this concept that all Americans are the same and safe and trustworthy and have the same goals to the world. Where when you're moving your business to India or China, oh, they're people just like us. They have our interests. Oh, this European bank we made a deal with, they believe in liberalism too. And so globalism um, massively erases giant actual cultural or strategic differences under this facade of uniformity, where people did business in China for 20 years, and they're like, the Chinese want liberalism too. They want to support their families. And then China became our greatest enemy. And now we in China are in a Cold War, but we didn't think that was possible. And so it was a gradually expanding idea. We started in America and we spread to the rest of the world. And I'm sorry that answer took so long.
No,
Well,
it's okay. Yeah,
let's
it's okay. What were
let's
you gonna
talk
say,
about
Adam?
porn and video games, you guys. What do you say?
Okay. What about them?
Well, the topic we were going to talk about is the incel revolution. Roger, you did a video that was pretty popular on. So this is obviously like a super popular topic. Why do you think it is so popular?
Because it speaks to a vast amount of the population who have no other outlet for this. I think in our era, there's this giant divide between the world that we have to pretend exists and the reality. We have to pretend that Black people are oppressed, even though there are massive affirmative action projects for them across every facet of society. We have to pretend the economy is good, even though most people are struggling. And so there's this giant disconnect between what you have to pretend about reality and what reality is. And I have built a career out of talking about the reality that we're not allowed to talk about. And so whenever I release videos on this topic, and the reason I keep on making videos on this topic in some iteration or another is that I think it's therapeutic for a large part of the populace, but they don't have that release in any other place. Where I think even mainstream conservative outlets, they're not real about this. The Daily Wire is not going to get real on this topic. And um, I mean, if you're looking at demographics, this is an issue that affects a literal statistical majority of young men, but there's no outlet to discuss it in society, which of course means that um, it touches a nerve.
Well, I
People
don't.
are hostile to the idea. It seems to me like when you talk about this stuff, there was a guy, there was a one of them, some mass shooting. This is years and years ago now. Some mass shooting happened, and I said, we got to stop demonizing young men and demonizing young men's problems. And there was a guy that was around my age and someone that I'd been friends with for a long time, and he was upset that I would say that, and he was mad, and he let me know on Twitter, and he blocked me and blah blah blah. And I was like, what are you're upset that I actually had the audacity to say that maybe we should look at men's problems. And it was a guy. Like, I'm like, why?
Yeah,
Like, how is that offensive to you? And how is that offensive to the point where you had that reaction? You know what I
I
mean?
can explain it.
There you
It's
go.
an emperor's new clothes problem between the sexes, where for men, men get status through being responsible and through taking and through sublimating their problems. If you're a man
Yeah.
and you don't worry and you don't complain, you work hard, you get rich, that's how you get laid and you get respect. And so men have this inbuilt reaction of no, I'm not going to complain about things because if you're with a group of friends and you just recently met them and you're out drinking and you just spend your first couple times you met complaining at how hard your work is, they're going to lose respect for you. And
Hmm.
so men have this reaction of I'm not going to complain, that's weak. And this has been exploited by our society
Yeah.
so that to basically exploit men. And meanwhile, women and the left, which safeguards the interests of women, don't want to look at this. Also, is an emperor's new clothes problem for them because it dismantles the lie. It dismantles their idea that men are oppressing women. Because if the majority of young men are in a situation they hate, men aren't oppressing women then, and men aren't exploiting women. And so it turns into this situation where no one in the ruling coalition can compromise on this principle because it would destroy the myths that allow them to unify together.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I agree with everything you're saying. And I would just add that also another problem is whenever someone says like, oh, there's an issue that men have or young men have, or dare you say that white people have, it's a lot of people just assume it's a dog whistle for, trying to
Hmm.
be misogynist or racist or
Yeah,
something. They won't actually hear what you're saying.
the
Yeah.
degree of projection which the left does is absurd. Where once I realized every single thing the left says is projection, my world got a lot clearer, but it also got darker. And I remember there was this example where I was in this reading this Twitter argument, and this woman wrote this criticism of a young man she was arguing with. And her criticism was such a beautifully poetic and intelligent description of the logical flaws in her argument that I just could not believe it. And I thought, this actually makes me believe in the human soul. Because if there is some deep part of you that knows what you're doing wrong, that must mean there's some part of your personality that knows what right and wrong is, and it's projecting it out upon the rest of the world. Um, and and so once you realize that everything the left does is projection, for example, mansplaining, femsplaining is called feminism. Um, if you look at dog whistles, the left constantly throws out dog whistles. And so whenever you hear toxic masculinity, we have toxic femininity. And so whenever you look at something the left says about the right that doesn't add up to reality, realize that it's a confession from the left.
Hmm. Yeah, I
I,
think that's because the whole structure again of kind of this neo-Marxist framework is to just essentially create traps in where they're like the oppressed class, or who they say is the oppressed class, is able to utilize power in very specific ways
Yes.
while denying those avenues of power or freedom to, the people they label oppressors. So everything just
Mhm.
becomes projection, and that
Yeah.
manifests as projection. Yeah.
So is the incel thing like a problem? You see it as people should be getting into serious relationships and getting married and having kids? Is that the path that you want, Rudyard?
I think that's the path that works the best socially, where if you have a society where that's not happening, the society is going to fall apart. It's the equivalent of you might not like working a job, but if you're looking at a society, most people don't like their jobs. But if you look at a society where most people, if you look at a society where 80% of young men don't have jobs, you would think, holy shit, society's going to fall apart. And I view relationships as equivalent, where I think uh, sexual romantic relationships are more important than having a job in the real human condition. There are loads of people who are married and unemployed in places in various third world countries where you can live off your family who are probably pretty satisfied. But if you're a young man, you're working really hard, but you're not in a romantic relationship, you're probably unsatisfied. And for whatever reason, our culture views an 80% unemployment rate as absolutely horrifying, but we view an 80% rate among young men of being single as not horrifying.
Is
Mhm.
it
And
that much?
so
Is it that high?
so it's two-thirds among the demographic 18 to 30. And so I'm guessing among the younger half of that demographic, it's something like 80%. Because if I've looked at various statistics from 25 to 30, and so that skews less single.
My question is, does porn and video games really make the incel path more palatable than relationships? In that case, people are voluntarily opting into this sort of lifestyle because they feel it's more entertaining than actually doing it the way you're talking about.
The greatest fallacy people have when they study the future versus the history is that they think this era is special. And every era thinks they're special, and none basically are. And um, I know a lot of young men. I interview them as part of my research. So I've spoken to hundreds of young men, and except for the very most beta, I don't think most are willing to substitute porn and video games for a real life. You know that's not a real substitute. And I only hear people who are not part of this demographic say that because if you're part of the demographic that is given that fate, the reality of that fate is so obvious and horrifying. And um, this is why you see all this discontent with the incel movement, with the reason the video did well, etc., is that if you ask a 20-year-old guy, are you are you satisfied with just being unemployed, watching porn, playing video games? Almost none will say yes. And the ones who are most willing to accept that fate are the kinds who would not launch a revolution and they just be pulled around by the currents of history.
Well, is the question like I think that most people would not say like, yes, I'm satisfied with porn and video games, but that those things can still have a massive biochemical addictive quality that basically, puts people into these negative spaces that can be difficult to break out of.
I
Well,
think
and
that,
also, especially if the relationships on offer are total crap. Like if your
yeah,
relationship, I mean, you could get into a relationship, but maybe it's not really the best relationship
yeah.
or
Also, the number of people, number of young women that are looking for relationships is probably at the lowest point ever, which is a significant reason as to why young men can't find relationships, right? Like if there are more women looking for relationships, it would at the very least there would be more men that had, there'd be more opportunities. So you would imagine there would be more men because whereas most women will go for like the best guy they can kind of lock down, like what everyone perceives as the best guy is not the same thing for every woman. Like there's a lot of variety that people like and stuff. So there would be a significantly larger percentage of the population looking or of young men that were in relationships if there were more women that were looking, first of all, and if the conditions in society didn't so strongly disinhibit men from approaching women and trying to actually get a relationship started. You know, like if you
Yeah.
can go ahead and awkwardly talk to a girl and get put on blast on someone's Twitter account, you know, and everyone at school sees it and you get embarrassed by it, you're going to be, you know, significantly disincentivized to talk to the next girl, you know, or
Right.
whatever. So,
What I
and
would
that kind
say,
of stuff does matter at a like a local level, like with schools. That's where it really happens. If all it needs to happen is one time to some 16-year-old kid, and he's never gonna try it again in college. Like if he gets made the fool of in high school, he'll never try that again, and that's a big deal, you know. So
yeah, I respond to a couple of things what you folks said. The first is that I think the porn and video games argument would work if this issue is half the scale it is. But if it's affecting a statistical majority of young men, if it was 20%, that 20% would be like beta men who would not do anything. But once you're getting into a statistical majority, you're getting enough men who are actually capable having this happen to, that I think you're ending up in revolution territory. And the other thing is that it's when people talk about this crisis, we're just talking about dating. The reality is you have to expand it to marriage because, and this is one of the points that I wish I put more emphasis upon, is a larger part of this crisis, in my mind, in the reality, is the breakdown of marriage, because that affects an older, wealthier, more powerful group of men. And keep in mind, 50% of divorces end in marriage. Sorry, 50% of divorces end in marriage. 50% of marriages end in divorce. And in a lot of cases, the wife will take the man's children and a majority of his money. That's ruining his life. Well, he did nothing wrong. And so what you're looking at is that even successful established men are thinking, this is a system which screws me over for me having done nothing wrong. And you add up the calculation if you're a young man today. Most of you are single. Most of you will, beyond that, not get married. If you do get married, there's a 50% chance you get divorced. I've seen statistics, a minority of marriages are happy. Your wife doesn't get overweight and stop being attractive to you. Your kids don't hate you. And this is something I don't understand. Our society massively decreases the importance of reproductive success. But the reality is reproduction is the most important thing in society, barring religion, where you can use religion to offset reproductive worries. But if you're a society where young men can calculate their chances of reproductive success and happiness are that low, no matter their social class, you're ending up in situations where the incentive is to rebel.
The R men being discriminated against in courts came up on another live stream that we did, and it made me question whether or not this is just an internet myth.
No, I've definitely seen it a lot in just my daily life.
Well, that's anecdote. I mean,
it's a massive problem. I mean, what
well,
statistics
we had some attorneys, some family law attorneys pop into chat and say, you know, they cover a bunch of these cases, and in the majority of the cases, it's not the case that the man gets taken to the cleaners. It does seem like a fair process, which makes me think, you know, it's just probably people who get screwed over in these cases. We see them more, so we think that that's a norm, but it's not necessarily the norm. So
no, it's definitely the statistical norm that the man loses in this sort of thing.
yeah, look, I would have to look at the specific statistics. So I'm just going off of the
But what
experience
does
of some
losing
people.
mean?
Even
Like losing
losing
more
the
money?
children and a
Hmm.
majority of his money. But even if it's not true, the idea that that's true would propagate this sort of thing. If the public believes this, and this is sort of thing the red pill says, then then that myth would be able to power the populace. And I mean, just a 50% divorce rate. And realistically, the man is the one who generated most of the income to support the family. So a 50% isn't the woman is taking more than she made. That like, even if we remove that one factor, you're looking at a really horrifyingly low reproductive success rate.
Hmm. I
I
mean,
just
I
if you're
agree that like if the perception of it is that the men always get screwed over, then that is definitely going to have a massive impact in terms of like how the younger
yes.
generation looks at relationships going forward.
Yeah.
Whether it's true or not, I don't know the answer to that because I know
And
also I don't remember the exact the reasoning for it because I know Actual Justice Warrior kind of around the Crowder thing. He in one of his videos, he was explaining how the divorce rate number two is kind of like a mathematical not like anomaly, but it's kind of like a weird mathematical thing because the boomers basically had, or the children of boomers have less kids than the boomers did, and so when the boomers start getting
Yeah.
divorced, it artificially inflates the divorce rate in a way that doesn't really is not indicative of like actual young people getting into relationships.
If the number, the lowest you can get is 40%, and that's still an absurdly high number. No matter how
Hmm.
you, if you halved the young male, if you halved the young male dating crisis or the marriage crisis, it would still be notable and it would still be horrifying to look at.
Sure.
And the other thing is that whenever I get into debates like this, the onus of proof is always on violence. But if you read history, humans default to violence very quickly. And the bloodiest war in human history happened within the lifetime of people alive today. And we've had two or three wars start in the last, like three, since COVID, we've had a couple of major wars start. And so, um, it's not difficult to get people to be violent.
Hmm. Yeah, I
I
mean, I
agree with
agree in
that.
terms of, yeah, that definitely there needs to be conversation and actual action on the fact that young men in America are getting left behind by society. Society right now, in my view, seems to be basically almost entirely focused, at least from a mainstream perspective. Obviously, things differ when you kind of talk about the left-right dichotomy, but mainstream society seems to be focused almost entirely through the prism of the female perspective, and everything seems to be kind of geared towards, the way in which women act and want to act, and traits that women that are like what we would consider feminine traits. And so men don't really know how to exist in this society and thus are getting left behind. What
Finding a
I,
girlfriend just seems easier than having a revolution, though. Like if it's pure, like
well,
pure difficulty level, and you're talking about going to revolutionary,
mhm.
like what's a causal chain there, Rudyard? Like how does a revolution end up in? I mean, are we seizing women? And
So humans are not rational, and
right,
we don't really make calculations like that. And these things happen on group levels, not on individual levels. And humans get carried away by the mob. And so what would gradually happen is that you would see a spark go off, and then the mob's opinion starts to change. And then, so when I talk about the incel revolution, I'm talking about the exact same event as the coming civil war. And so it's and I'm not sure if this came across in the videos I've made. When I'm talking about said incel revolution, it's literally the same event as the Civil War videos I talk about. It's just I'm looking at it through another angle. And so when or if said revolution happened, it would be done under political auspices. No one would say, let's fucking rebel for the red pill. Let's rebel for Andrew Tate. That would
It's
not be
it's
the
just that there are
catchphrase.
too many men that don't have reason to invest in society.
Yes,
Yeah.
what Phil said. And on the group level, the calculation would be made. I'm screwed on like 10 different levels. And we're isolating just the dating example. There's economics, there's dating, there's religious, there's social. The calculation's made socially. And then once people see their fellow brothers rebelling, they would join in. And and the thing is that the right-wing warlords or the leadership would use changes in the marriage laws and changes in social policy to justify this war to young men, or even just mass grape, where like the grape of Nanking was within human life. Sorry, it was within the last human life.
Mhm.
The Eastern European grapes under the Russians were also within living memory. And so we view this as just too barbaric to happen, but it's completely imaginable.
it's
I don't.
imaginable. I don't know if it's imaginable in our current paradigm.
What I would say is that our society is actually not that moralistic. And what I mean by that is that we put up a very thin veneer of morality, but we don't actually teach anyone any moral points. In my opinion, America of 100 years ago was a much more moralistic society than is today because you were taught be humble, respect other people, have honor, have discipline. And now we say, if you can mouth the right words, you're a moral person. You don't have to spend years instilling this moral code. And so I actually think it's easier because we've removed an actual moral code you can hold the populace to. We've also removed the sense of compromise between the sexes, where 100 years ago, if in the last American Civil War, there wasn't mass grape because there was still a sense of respect between the sexes and respect for Southerners. Rightists and leftists have no respect for each other, and men and women have lost any respect for each other. And we view each century as progress from the last. But the wars of the 20th century were fought in a vastly less humane way than the 18th or 19th centuries.
Wait,
The
I
world
just
wars were far less humane than the Napoleonic Wars, the Seven Years' War, the US Civil War.
yeah, those are all the very different times. So I don't see how you can say that there's not some kind of moral code in society. Like if you put in a movie the heroes in a war, like, look at Saving Private Ryan. Like if the guys in Saving Private Ryan were going around mass raping people in every village, like obviously our society would rebel against it. They would no longer be the heroes. We would view them as the villains of the movie. So to say that there's absolutely no moral framework in our society, it's just the facts don't line up with that.
I think there's a very thin veneer of moralizing where we create this, we have a very sterile society and a very plastic society where things need to be safe, they need to be clean. But to jump off the video you folks made a couple days ago with about these Columbia kids, is that they're screaming death to the Jews. I'm sure they were socialized for the entire previous part of their life. The Holocaust was bad. I'm roughly the same age as these kids. I was taught the Holocaust about like 6 or 7 times in school. So you have this was shoved down these kids' throats, but they don't actually have a reason to support it. Because there's no, it's a lot of shaming that's happening to them, but it's not something that they've really internalized. And I see this on the right too, where there is a ridiculous degree of misogyny on the right now. And I think that there is this external form of a moral structure, but I don't think it's been internalized very deep into the population.
Mm-hmm.
Phil, you want to respond?
No, I mean, I don't have significant arguments with anything that he's saying. Yeah, I mean, I don't have nothing stuck out where I was like, hold on, a man, So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the question for me really is, yeah, is it society that's forcing people into this position, or is it just incentive structures? Like
I think
are
that I think it's both, because like the stuff when it comes to what society expects from people and what society celebrates in media, and it's not the government doing it. It's more like what media produces and stuff. But it upholds like the Murphy Brown. You can have it all. You can be a CEO and have 2 or 3 kids and live that life, and you can do it all on your own. That kind of thing is common. The making a mockery of the father figure is common, or the father figure is not there. Those things are fairly normal in media. I feel like I do think that it's more driven by media. I think that the LGBT stuff that comes, where every 6 weeks there's some kind of LGBT identity being celebrated and stuff, and I think that society definitely doesn't promote family. And I think if government is going to promote any type of lifestyle at all, it should be promoting the lifestyle that produces more people for society, that helps produce more society. So
I
I don't think
think
that I go ahead.
I think Phil made a great point, and it reminds me of look at the most popular movies of our time: Fight Club, The Matrix, or 20 years ago, American Beauty. What's the theme of all three of these popular movies of the late 90s? It's we have a very sterile, boring, fake society that the men rebel against, and they go into a darker, grittier, but realer world. And I think that's symbolic of the underlying trends of the society, where in each of them, just our society I think everyone in our society finds our society disgusting because the fact that our society is disgusting is something that the entire political spectrum agrees on. The left hates society, the right hates society, the mainstream hates society, which is why we're committing social suicide. And so at this, we're seeing the breakdown of this over socialization in this corporate plastic society. And on both the right and the left, you're seeing intense bloodthirstiness. And the fact that what we just saw at Columbia is such a perfect encapsulation of this bloodthirstiness on the left. And if I was had to explain what we just saw at Columbia to people a year ago, they would not believe it. They would not think these upper class college kids would be shouting in Arabic calling for the death of the Jews. That would be completely incomprehensible. But these tensions were simmering under the surface. And then
right. You in your video you talk about dating apps and how dating apps will give certain people leverage, and you make an argument that this is leveraging men against women. But
it leverages a small group of men, where if you look at the statistics of dating apps, they have inequality comparable to South Africa, which is the most unequal country in the world.
right.
And so
Rough.
So
have
look,
a small
you're
group of
completely
men.
making the point that I want to make. So, but isn't it really leveraging men against men? Isn't it leveraging that 20% against the 80%?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So then I mean, we've always had that. We've always had, men fighting for outsized mating potential against other men.
It's the degree though, and it's the expectation where, for example, if you had if you had a rise in dating inequality to not the extent that it is, I would not worry. But to the scale we're operating at, and again, it's not even 20%. The 20% gets almost all the dating options. It's the top 5% that gets 60% or 40%, something like that. And the thing with all those ancient tribal societies is that the inequality is not that extreme, but the other thing built into those societies is mass warfare. Where if you look at any society where the chieftain gets a lot of women, that society is permanently at war. Where the young men who don't get laid, they die in war. And so that perpetuates the social structure because as the men die off, they don't need to get married. And so it would just result in what we're talking about.
Well,
Yeah,
no, polygynous.
the fact that
Go ahead, Phil.
go ahead. Well, the fact
No,
that that war has historically, got rid of a significant portion of young men is like why like half of men in history haven't been able to go on to, reproduce and stuff. That's the fact that we've stopped doing that as society is part of the reason why we have this phenomenon where there's so many men that, that there's so many men that don't see, a fulfilled life the way that you anticipate you would by finding a mate and starting a family and stuff. And when you get too many men that are unfulfilled, young men that are unfulfilled, they end up starting, conflict just because that's what men do.
So polygynous societies are more violent than monogamous societies. I think the scientific literature definitely backs this up. And I do think American society is kind of de facto polygynist because you've got guys who are, what do they call them? Like high value mates or whatever. They always have these terms for them, right? So they can go through like a string of girlfriends and, and basically completely destroy the mating market for everyone else. I do think that that's happening. And in a society where we didn't have porn and video games, men might rebel. But I think porn and video games are preventing that rebellion and even kind of incentivizing. Like I've heard a lot of young guys will say, look, I don't want to go out with this girl because, I want someone that I can marry. I want someone who's not been with 20 other guys, right? She's not done the dating app thing or whatever, right? I believe there are women out there that are not all over these dating apps and are just having sex with every Obviously, there are a lot of women that are having sex and bragging about it on the internet, having sex with like 20 guys and stuff like that.
But
So
those people are the outgoing people. Like the problem that arises is like if women are on dating apps and if they are accepting messages from men and if they are talking about it on the internet, they're far more outgoing than women that don't do those things. And the women that don't do those things, they're still looking to meet men. It's just they're not like over, talking about it on social media, you know what I mean? Or at least
yes,
not like talking about it on in place on podcasts at least.
whenever this comes up occasionally, we always get the arguments in the chat. This last time this came up, somebody was like, "But Adam, like all the women I have access to are like single moms. Like that's the only avenue that I have." And I actually went and looked into it, like how many women that are about, marriageable age and single, and how many of those women are single moms. And it was minute by comparison. So I do think it's like a perception issue that's going on here. People think their perception is reality when, you just kind of got to get out and look a little further and you see things are different.
The issue is that for no demographic are you hitting the target reproductive goals, which is why the birth rates in the crap are right now.
I'm just talking
And
about getting a girlfriend, Rudyard. I'm not talking about the target
no, but you're
reproductive.
forgetting that humanity's goal, like this is what we're bred to do. And there's multiple layers to this for different demographics. And I know people in each demographic. And so,
Mhm.
for example, half of Gen Z girls are slated to never marry and to be spinsters for their lives. That's horrible. For a lot of these Chad guys who are sleeping with lots of women, they don't respect these women. And the reason they're just going through them is they don't see them as marriage material or serious or anyone they'd actually date. And they start to view them with contempt. And then these women obsess over these guys. They're not going to date anyone at their level. And then there's this underclass of men who basically gets no action and this large. So then you have this group of women pining for this group of men, but these men aren't dating them. And so just no one in this equation is winning. And whenever I talk to someone who's married, they don't believe how dystopian the reality is, where it's just incredibly dystopian.
Well, look, and I don't want to disparage anyone. Like I am married. I wouldn't really want to be in this marriage market as it is. It seems pretty insufferable to me. I think obviously relationships are difficult and it's easy for people to kind of rationalize why their relationships aren't working, especially when they have a pretty satisfying, relationship with themselves, just with video games and porn being so
Let's
widely accepted now.
let's use this argument for economics. So you say we have a large group of men who are working part-time jobs or they can barely pay rent or they can't pay rent. And so if we use these arguments for dating for economics, it would suddenly look very different. Where if you said this large you imagine before the French Revolution, you tell these peasants, you should just work harder, you should try to find more jobs, you should move to a different city. And they're like, yeah, we did that. The labor market's still terrible. Um, Past a certain point, it's not an individual issue. And for every person, their life is an individual issue, but then it compounds to a collective issue. And we almost exclusively treat social situations as individual issues, but we treat economics as collective issues. And so if you look at pre-industrial societies, you have these very strict social norms of you have to follow these social rules for society to function. But then we removed that, and now the idea of ever defaulting back onto it is unimaginable. But once you hit a certain threshold, as almost a natural law, it's going to compound.
We've removed a lot of the incentive. It's like, so I retweeted something this morning. There was a young lady that got robbed by a guy, and there was another guy sitting there and just kind of watched it happen. It was in Chicago, and I'm just like, look,
Yeah, I read
there's
your
no
tweet.
incentive. What was that?
I read your tweet.
Yeah, and it's like there's no incentive for guys for men to do manly things, right? Like for men to do things like step in to defend women. There's no incentive. They know they're going to get picked. They're going to go to jail. They know they're going to get picked up by the cops. There's not going to be a situation like it was back in the day where like the cops would walk up and be like, pat him on the back. Thanks for helping the girl. Like you're going to go to jail. You're probably going to face a civil suit. You know, the person that you interpose yourself between, if you hurt him, he's definitely going to sue you. Like all of the things to incentivize young men to act like young men are gone. Like they're gone. And so why should men do things that are supposed to be, that are thought of as manly things? The whole like, be a real man. That is the idea of a real man has turned into something that we aspire, or that young men aspire to be. It has gone from that into a term to abuse men and make them to manipulate men into doing things that are against their own interest, right? Like that guy that was sitting down there, people like, if he was a real man, he would have got up and sacrificed his life, his security, his property for a woman that he didn't know. And that's just, there's nothing in it for a guy anymore. There's not. You're gonna go to jail. And it's terrible, but we have to have society incentivize men being men. That means we have to hold men that would step in to help people for no reason other than it's the right thing to do. We have to hold men like that in high esteem. And that's not going to happen as long as we put them in jail. Period.
I mean, I kind of agree with both perspectives, because obviously, I don't, risking your life for some utter stranger doesn't really entertain my, but I get what you're saying. Like, it is heroic. So,
and if we don't hold heroism in high esteem, and that includes when men put their body in, interpose their body between, someone that needs help and someone that's trying to attack them. If you don't give people a social reward for that, if you, and there's still, everyone knows that if you do anything, you're going to go to jail. If you mess anyone up, the criminal is going to be able to sue you. That's just that is a known thing nowadays. There's no question about it. Everyone knows. So why are you going to help? Why are you going to ruin your life for someone else? And granted, there are still people that are out there that are going to say, hey, yeah, it's important. And, fair enough. And in some places, I might be that guy. It depends on where we are. But if we're in Chicago, I'm not going to be that guy. If I'm in New Hampshire, I might be that guy. I might be that guy in West Virginia. If I'm in New York City, I'm not going to be that guy. Absolutely not. Because I'm not going to pull a gun on I'm not going to have a gun in New York. In New Hampshire, I might. I won't go to jail.
Is this some woman that got beat up or something? And
just someone tried to like, luckily for her, she managed to get her hand on the gun or something like that and yank the magazine out of the gun. I mean, it was probably a junk gun, probably wouldn't have fired or whatever, because of the fact that you can pull the magazine out, like in a struggle, you got a problem with your gun. Seriously, that you got a bad gun. But, like she struggled a little bit, and there was a guy sitting down, sitting on the ground watching it happen.
Well, look, he's probably got a wife and kids. Like, he's like, why am I going to like risk my wife and kids for this woman? Right.
But if you want a society, I get it. But if you want a society that's
not my job to save this lady's ass.
Yeah.
I don't know the particulars of the situation. I don't want to throw judgment at the guy for not getting involved. For me, I don't know if that has anything to do with like the incel situation. I do think, like, obviously women civilize men. Like, the guy sitting there probably has a wife, and he's like, my wife will kill me if I go get shot. Like, what the fuck?
Well,
why am I getting involved?
Kids, but either way.
Oh, okay.
I definitely see the logical connection between what Phil's saying and the incel issue, because
let's hear it.
These are all holistically the same event. And this is the thing I keep on bringing up, because we were talking about the Civil War a month ago, or a couple months ago, whatever. This is the same event as the Civil War. It's just that the incel part of it will be another motivation out of 20. And one of the ironies of WhatIfAltHist is I keep on talking on basically one event that I think is going to happen in the future, and I've covered it from 100 perspectives. And so you're looking at a society and how it treats men. And I think the story Phil gave is actually a great symbol, because this guy is stuck in a no-win scenario. If he saves the girl, he gets shamed. He realized
Okay,
he
yeah,
didn't
good
do
point.
anything. He still gets shamed. And so it's literally a no-win scenario. And he chooses to not get involved, and he still gets roasted for that. And it's a symbol of the relations between men and women and the expectations women have of men. And you have this outdated idea from 100 years ago that a man should just save this random woman because in said social structure, women were viewed as weak and helpless. And now you can't have the idea women are strong. It's the Schrodinger's feminist. A woman can't be strong, empowered, whatever, but also be this weak creature who's being exploited by men all the time and is just in can't deal with them. And the other thing I'd throw out is that the the these things are not done for rational reasons. You look at wars, you look at how people get violent. In no way is it rational. I was sitting down in a bar in Salisbury, Massachusetts, and I had some friends with me, and I asked a guy, "Hey, can you move a seat over?" And he said, "Hey, if this wasn't a good day, I'd beat the crap out of you. And you're so disrespectful." Coming from Pennsylvania, I thought that was a completely reasonable request. But to this guy, that
I'm
was
from
an
Massachusetts.
his
That's a
honor.
totally reasonable request.
Yeah, and so he threatened to beat me up, and I was gonna buy him a drink to thank him for moving over, and then he immediately said, "Hey, if I wasn't on a good day, I'd beat the crap out of you." And so that's a great example where we get stuck in this economics game theory situation of, oh my God, under these conditions, it's rational to defect. But the reality is that people aren't rational. Like there are certain situations, someone will cut me off as I'm driving, and I will honk at them because I hate them, not because I made a rational calculation. And you have this entire demographic of young men. And I don't think this is something older people understand. My generation of young men has been pissed on their entire life by the education system, the TV media, corporations for guys my age, fighting age males. This has been our entire lives. And then you look at it, and the society expects you to make a further sacrifice for no gain. And even if it's an irrational calculation, enough men will basically just say, I can't take this. And you'll just have a rage reaction kick in. And if you look at history, I once read a historian who said World War I was caused by every country in Europe feeling it would be an insult to their honor to not fight the war.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna run to the bathroom. Be back in a second.
Okay.
That's cool. Even in actual revolutions, everybody does the calculation though. They do is the status quo acceptable? It might suck. It might be horrible, but is it acceptable, and is the unknown of revolution worth the cost? And that same thing is,
Adam.
well, that same thing is happening here in the incel revolution. It's like, it might be nice to have a girlfriend. There's not really one that I find attractive or interesting. That's in my orbit. And look, people in the chat are giving me a hard time saying, acting as if I'm making an anti-video game argument. Look, video games are amazing. I love video games. Okay?
You're saying it's preventing revolution.
I'm saying, look, if video games are fun, man, they're a lot more. I could see
it's the modern opiate of the masses. It's the opiate of the masses for young men.
Look, I could see staying home and playing video games being far more entertaining than going out with a lady that you have very little in common with. And why wouldn't you just do that? Why wouldn't you just stay home and play the video games?
Think about what I said earlier. Like, all it takes is one bad experience for stay home and play video games, as opposed to getting mocked by your classmates for that to be a preferable option. And once you decide that's a preferable option and it gives you enough dopamine to get by, then there's you can go from being a normal kid, right, that tries to approach a girl. He's 16 years old or whatever, right? Tries to approach a girl, talks to a girl or whatever. She then makes fun of text messages that he sent or whatever, sends them all around school, right? Because social media is a weapon unlike anything that's ever been given to teenagers. She then puts, sends it all around school, all of their friends, all the neighboring school, blah, 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 find out that this kid said something awkward, and then he is never going to text a girl again because he's going to select hanging out with his friends on the internet, talking smack on Xbox Live, and playing video games and jerking off to porn and smoking pot.
And
right?
that's
Because
probably
those are all things that are
smart,
super low effort to get,
and that's probably the smart decision. Like it's not even, I mean, I can't really, I'm not here to judge, man. I don't know that I blame these people. So,
yep.
Are the actions the left does rationally proportionate
to what?
Their issues in society? So we're looking at this from the perspective of the right, but we look at the perspective of the left. The left, you have this class of elite aspirants who got college degrees, and the college degrees led them nowhere. And so you're looking at a somewhat similar issue on the left of incentive structures as what we're talking about the incels on the right.
Not really though, because obviously in the elite aspirants, they see themselves as having a place in the status hierarchy that's precarious.
You have right-wing, this isn't the point I'm making, but to stay on it for a second, you have right-wing elite aspirants, where if you're a young white man, you basically have to give up on social mobility in a lot of cases because you won't get hired or you won't get promoted.
But they don't necessarily have elite aspirations.
So, but if you're a young white man and you are an elite aspirant, you are basically screwed due to the policies going on now. And if you look at the left is clearly not behaving in a rationally proportionate way. So looking at the left's actions, you can tell that human nature is not rationally proportionate. It can feel hurt and then it can massively overreact. And people's pride is a much bigger motivator than we give it credit for. But again, I keep on returning to this because it's a sign of how insane things can get. Look at Columbia, look at Harvard. These are people acting out of their emotions in a massively disproportionate way, literally screaming, we need to kill people in the middle. We need to kill Arabs. And I think the right is as capable of that as the left is. And when things get bad, they get bad. And the world is not rational or reasonable. And so people don't behave in rational or reasonable ways. And I find it ironic that I don't think I convinced Sitch, but I got Adam to agree that we'd have a civil war a couple months ago. I'm describing the exact same.
I think we're having.
So I'm describing this incel revolution is the exact literal same event as that civil war I described.
Well, I don't know. Did you convince that? I think Adam's been on that train for a while because of the.
Okay, I might not have convinced
the fourth turning.
Adam might have rationally come to a different calculation. Yeah. But when I talk of the incel revolution, just factor in it's literally the same civil war as what I'm talking about. It's just guys on the right using sex as a motivator.
A lot of the world is at war right now, just because we aren't. But go ahead, Sitch.
Well, I was gonna say, like, when we talk about the Colombian protesters, and I forget there's that other school that we covered where Colombian, the other school that we were talking about where they like stormed into the dean's office and they refused to leave, until they were allowing them to do the BDS stuff. And then they were all like crying these epic tears of the fact that they were arrested for like 6 hours. And it's the same thing, Ilhan Omar's daughter is like, oh my God, I was arrested for, 6 hours and I couldn't get to my, stuff and I couldn't get the food. And what am I going to do? This is the daughter of like a congressperson. And it's hard for me. And I agree that it is all irrational and it's all motivated by emotion and that the right has kind of the same energy. But it's hard for me to, like, I think so much of what's going on right now with both the left and the right and with the incel stuff is the psychology of safetyism that has been basically pushed upon kids and making kids, hyper anxious and all this stuff. And it's hard for me to see that manifesting into some kind of violent civil war revolution when all these people seem to be very weak, I guess. Exactly. They're not exactly the people I can see like picking up guns and storming the streets and doing things of that nature.
In my opinion, people keep on forgetting that there is a vast region of the country where hunting is normal, military service is normal, and it's a very martial culture.
Yeah, but those aren't the incels though.
So this is something I constantly see where people act like the incels are the bottom 20% of the populace, but
Mm-hmm.
statistically, you're dealing with a majority of young men. And so we need to remove this mental image of incels being these basement dwelling losers. They are a giant demographic thing that goes across the population, across social classes. And so you do have this very aggressive demographic in America that I don't think people on the coasts remember exists. Like there's large parts of the country where military service, you just have a bunch of veterans lying around, or people have been hunting ever since they're age 10, or where like every single family has guns.
Um, okay. But you think, I don't know. You think that those are the people that are going to be like the military age people who have been doing weapons training, that are part of the militia, they're the ones that are going to basically spark some kind of violent revolution in this
I
country.
think we're
And
going back to the
is
Civil War.
and there's going to be, but this needs to be supported by some kind of political faction
Yes,
that has actual power in America at the moment.
yes.
And which faction would do that? I don't really see that
We're
manifest.
going back to the Civil War. So my
Hmm.
top bet is that another thing is that wouldn't surprise me if the deep state tries to launch a foreign war to get rid of these young men. That would not surprise me at all.
The,
But
the deep
so
state.
yeah,
Like, what does that mean? What do you mean by that?
like the bureaucracy which
Hmm.
maintains set agendas no matter who the political regime is. It's why we keep on sending drones to the Middle East. It's why the government bureaucracy in the executive branch has pre-established ingrained patterns, and it's why we're sending so much money to Israel and Ukraine. It's why all certain corporations always get benefited. Um, there is an entrenched governmental elite, but I think it's the same thing as the Civil War. In my opinion, the most likely option is we have a budget issue or a foreign war. The government splinters by this. You have the right and the left. The right establishes its capital in Texas. The left, I don't know, maybe have a couple, maybe they keep it in Washington, D.C. And then basically the military conscripts young men. And they take these young men and say, hey, you don't have a choice to play video games and watch porn. You're going to serve in the military now. And then as the war continues, right-wing commanders inside the military become more aggressive. They play to their soldiers more. And so once the war is over, and I would say the right wins, there are these groups of there are these commanders inside the right, like Commander Philibon. There are these commanders inside the right who become more aggressive, and they basically say, "You can grape whatever girls you want in this town if you follow me unquestioningly. I will launch a
Disavow.
counter coup to install myself as dictator."
Can't believe
And
you do this, Phil. Jesus.
Disavow. Disavow.
and so I think that this will start out as a governmental issue where I think if this event happens, people will not call it the incel revolution. They will call it the Second American Civil War that happened to have a lot of grapes. Um,
Oh
and
my God.
That happened to what?
happened to have a
Grapes.
lot of
A lot of
grapes.
You
grapes. A lot of
look,
grapes.
you can say rape on our channel.
Well,
It's okay.
Yeah.
We're not
I didn't know what your monetization system was. I know
look, we
on a
don't
lot of YouTube
we're
channels,
not
people
too
think,
worried about it here. We've got a angel investor by the name of JMac who takes care of us
J-Mac, we love
pretty
you.
well. So we
yeah,
don't
so
we can say rape on the channel.
J-Mac is
yeah.
wonderful.
But I just look, I can't imagine this is like this is a horror movie you're describing here.
Yeah,
I
life's a
can't
horror
imagine
movie.
American boys going out and just raping and pillaging across the American
Why not? That's
countryside.
normal. Not doing that is an aberrant. Raping and pillaging is normal. It's very few armies that don't do that.
Yeah, but we're
Are,
Americans though. This is
America,
like,
has the American army ever engaged in that behavior? Like,
But
not a great
and not
there have been
celebrating
anomalous
it.
behaviors.
yeah.
ennui and degradation is the norm. And it's like I see no moral force against that. And I hang out on the right a lot. And if someone, whenever you try to appeal to humanity, you get laughed at on the new dissident right.
Yeah,
And
but the
Yeah.
new dissident right is a very extreme small faction
And they're the
of the
but these
largest, aren't
extreme
they?
population.
small factions win. Look at the French Revolution, the Jacobins win, Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks win. English Civil War, the Puritans win. American Civil War, the radical Republicans win. In each case, a well-armed radical faction ends up winning. And it's just, I don't actually see anything you can appeal to that'll work for humanity because the left clearly has no moral standards it'll enforce. In the right on the other side, the right views any humanity or appeal to the Care Foundation and Heights system as cucked. I'm
Well,
going to get going at 3, by the way. Or 3
okay.
months.
Well, it's like even starting a war even on the left is very unpopular. Even Biden was like kind of like please Israel, don't do anything to Iran. We really don't want to like start a war. So it's hard for me to see unless things change dramatically that the left is going to start a war. Obviously, the right has no mechanism currently for starting a foreign war in the first place with all the isolationism. So, but I know I asked you this before, and I think you said, and I'm curious if you still agree with it, that if the election goes by, the coming election goes by, and there isn't some kind of massive break off of violence, is that going to change your calculation or your thought process on terms of this coming civil war?
Frankly, so I will take responsibility if nothing happens. I will take responsibility that I failed in my prediction.
Mhm.
So you can have that. The problem I see is just I look at I look at it like a river, and there's no way this river can keep flowing without very bad things happen. There is no apparatus for institutional change in our society where you have this giant demographic in the society which is completely un which is completely screwed over. In fact, it's most of the population, and there is no mechanism for reform in the system. And so what that means is that the system has to break down because um, things just can't continue at this level. And it's imagine you've been drinking too much and you know you're going to throw up, and because the food just has to come out, and you can stop it for a little bit, but you know that on a fundamental basis you cannot hold that in your stomach.
Look, if Rudyard has to go soon, we should read some super chats because we got some very generous ones, and
Sure. Okay.
you've got about 20 more minutes, right, Rudyard?
Yeah, I'm
You got to go
leaving
at top
at
of the
3
hour.
my time, which is 1 your time.
You should
Okay.
read that super chat of the. Oh, I copy it now.
Well, first I'll read JMac.
It.
Thank you so much, our surrogate father JMac, for $300. Thank you so much.
Wow, Jamie,
Yes,
you are
look at
too
that.
Look at that. Says, right before I met my wife, I had about given up on women. My fiance cheated on me, had another girlfriend steal $3,000 from me, got screwed left and right. However, the one thing I made sure that I did is to keep doing the things I love, like theater. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have met my wife.
Yeah,
Well,
that's one thing.
That's
Like dudes
great.
need to like dudes. If there's any dudes out there that are having problems meeting chicks, like work on yourself, like that kind of stuff, like doing self-improvement stuff. Like you feel better about yourself and people notice. Like seriously, like go to the gym, get a hobby, learn how to do some stuff. Don't focus so much on trying to like meet the girls. Do some stuff that makes you interesting and that like gives you stuff to talk about and things that you're interested in, and then you interact with people in society, and that's how you meet people. Like, don't sit
Yeah,
around
I agree with
and
Phil
whine about
here.
it at home.
Yeah, don't give up. Don't give
Yeah.
up. Persevere. You
Do
agree with that, Rudyard, right? Stick with it.
do do whatever you have to do so you don't kill yourself while also improving.
My God.
Well,
It's
I mean, that's part of why you should get up and do stuff. Like you should go and find things that you enjoy, right? Find reasons to live. And when you find reasons, like things that you like doing and stuff that interests
Oh
you,
yeah,
it
yeah.
enriches your life, and that makes you more interesting to other people. And being out doing things makes it more likely that you'll interact with someone that might be looking for the same, like a big part of people's problems when they get depressed and stuff is they just sit at home and they don't have to go out, so they don't get up, they don't get dressed, they don't go out, they don't do things, and it becomes a recurring cycle, and it
Yep.
it drags you down. So get up and do things in your life. Like that's a big part of meeting people and having a fulfilling life. So I'm not saying that's going to solve everyone's problems, but there are some people out there that will help them.
Mr.
Completely.
Ubercross was the super chat I was talking about. Remember, for 24 months. That you
Thank you,
want to
Mr.
read
Ubercross, for being
Yeah.
2-year member. Thank you so much.
And our resident attorney.
There you go. Says yes, our resident attorney says according to the census, 72% of people who have been married are married to their first spouse. The divorce rate has been falling for 20 years. And that also, I guess, relates to Spencer Harmon for also for 2 years. Thank you so much, Spencer Harmon, who says, spending my 2-year message to tell WhatIfAltHist, who I say this with love, that actual Justice Warrior broke down and debunked the divorce numbers that WhatIfAltHist used in his video.
Oh, really? Wow. Oh, coming
dun,
at
dun,
you.
Dun.
There you go.
I was slightly disappointed to hear those stats from What If. With love, he says. With love.
With love.
I do think it could be a perception issue, but
it's
look,
also
I'm biased. I'm married. I'm just like rationalizing my perspective.
It's also very easy to skew numbers, and I say this argument also cuts me. It's very easy to skew arguments based upon what data set you use. And for example, with Ancestry in America, the real number for British Americans is about a third of the population, but most statistics say English Americans are 7%. Or if you want to count GDP, and the actual GDP of Kenya is 6 times what the purported GDP among the UN's numbers are, or the US government's numbers are. And so it's easy to get numbers depending on how you want to look at the data. But the 40% number I've pulled that from like 20 different sources.
Rudyard, what's going on with you? Okay, you're like internet famous. You know, you're a good looking guy. I mean, you're I think 22. Like, if you started now, I think you could have like 10 kids. Like, what?
Oh
why?
yeah, I mean,
where's Mrs.
Adam, we've
Lynch?
talked about my private life in your DMs. I like to keep my private life private.
He's saying he already has 10 kids.
Look,
okay,
I'm not trying.
I would like to have a lot of children. Yeah.
Well, I'm not trying to out you on anything you've said privately to me. I'm saying, like, you know, be the change that you want to see, right? Look,
yeah,
it's never too soon to get married.
So
well,
I'm not going to get married. I do want to have lots of children, though.
What you're gonna have bastard children?
No, I've been comparing the child support numbers versus, God, should I say this publicly?
Look, you're too terrified.
Oh no.
After all of your talking about how people are irrational and they do irrational things, you're like, I'm calculating the numbers rationally.
That's so rational. So I'm not like other girls. I want you to keep that in mind. And of course, I'm 22. Don't hold me the things I say now. I'm young enough that I can change my mind.
You just haven't met the right woman. It's just a matter of time.
Listen. Let me before you get into
Phil, you've met all the right women. Okay.
Listen, our guitar player Mike, he swore up and down that he wasn't getting married, he wasn't having kids. That man is married and he's got a 2-year-old. So all the stuff that Rudder's saying right now, Rudder, this is all for now. And as soon as he meets the right woman, it could be all different. Because I've seen that happen. Man, that vagina is a magic thing. So
I'm just here to chill.
Wow. So, what do you have what is the solution, I guess, Rudyard, to the incel problem?
I mean,
do you have a solution?
Problems often don't have solutions. Like, this is one of the things I see a lot. If I drink too much and I'm going to throw up, I'm going to throw up. This problem doesn't have a solution. And just like, imagine it's 1914. What's the solution to World War I? World War I just has to happen. And that's how I feel. And that's not a pretty answer.
You kill Woodrow Wilson.
The war still happens.
So even if someone's like here, even if someone's like here, Rudyard, you have like an infinite resources to do whatever you want. You're just like, it doesn't matter.
Nothing's gonna happen.
The throw up has to throw up. Okay.
Yeah, it's like, what would I use? I mean, the U.S. government has infinite resources, and they're not stopping this.
Yeah, but people can't agree on what is a problem and how to even solve the problem once they agree there is a problem.
My two-step policy for fixing society: increase wages by shrinking the labor pool and get rid of wokeness.
It is the problem.
I'm agreeing with at least the second part of that.
You don't want to increase wages?
Well, I agree, but it depends what you mean exactly, like how that would be manifested. Like, I don't agree in like a nationwide just raising of the minimum wage, but
that wouldn't work.
Is the problem, and as you see it, Rudyard, the birth rates, or is it the unhappiness of the incels?
It's all of that. It's a holistic issue that is
Okay.
encapsulated in the
Which
declining birth rate, the economic issues, the unhappiness of the incels.
it's both, but I'm making a hierarchical list here. Which one do I put on top?
The birth rate's the worst issue in society, in my
The birth
opinion.
rates. Okay.
Um,
Mm.
in which like that's basically going to screw everything else over because the industrial world's birth rate is so low that it's an existential issue.
Is it an issue if we finally develop automation like robot people that can do all the work? Is the birth weights a problem because of
But then
work?
the rich will own those robots to do the work, and then we'll become a vastly unequal society. And then you'll end up with money sharing issues where like, do you extort money from the rich to pay for the elderly? How do you divide up that revenue? How does an aging societies don't invent anything? There is no aging society that's inventive, and as societies gets older, they stop inventing. Like what happened to Europe and Japan? How do you keep those inventions if the population's aging? How do
There
you?
are people that make the argument that the United States hasn't invented anything. We've upgraded things and perfected things, but there hasn't been any significant inventions or discoveries in
We
the US in a
invented
long
the
time.
internet. Oh yeah, so you are right in that World War II, we've barely had any technological breakthroughs since then. Actually, that's a good point on your part, where like I think the British invented the computer, but then we massively upgraded the computer.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I guess you could say, was the machine learning seems to be a new invention that's going to
Yeah.
change everything
I'm
going
not
forward.
convinced that it's actually learning, to be honest with you. Right now, the large language models, it's predictive about because of what things have said, but I
Hmm.
don't think that that's actually learning the
Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
way
I
that
don't disagree with you.
Mimic.
That's just the word used to describe
okay.
the
Yeah, okay, fair
concept
enough.
of what is
Fair
of
enough.
what's happening.
It's
Um,
like you talk to a parrot and you train the parrot to say words, but the parrot has no comprehension of what it
it's
says.
just brute
Exactly.
forcing its way to figure out solutions to things, which I mean
Yeah.
is kind of how humans were essentially kind of doing it. So just a sped up process.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's basically evolution sped up in a computer. Adam unfriended for $50.5. Thank you so much. Says question for Rudyard. Do you think the rise of older people having sex or dating or younger is the result of the dating market, both sexes being pushed away from normal relationships and teaching kids sex ed too early? What's your theory? S class is the best class.
What is can you do that question again, please?
It's kind of worded
It's
strangely. Do you think the
interesting.
rise of older people having sex or dating or younger is a result of the dating market, both sexes being pushed away from having normal relationships and teaching kids sex ed too early?
In that it's like, let's say, a 40-year-old man dating a 20-year-old girl.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm not
So
sure.
that's pretty historically normal.
Mm-hmm.
In most non-European pre-industrial societies, a man would get married at age 27 or 25 to a 15-year-old bride. And
Mm-hmm.
an interesting difference for European societies is that Europeans, since the rise of Christianity, have had much closer ages in marriage. Where if you went back to medieval Europe, it would be like a 25-year-old marrying a 20-year-old or a 23-year-old marrying a 21-year-old. Um, and so large age gaps in between men and women are lower now than they've been for most eras of history. And I think like you're dealing with mass inequality in the dating field. And so women are like, I want a guy who's top 1% income. But the amount of guys who are my age who are top 1% income is just infinitely small. And so if you want to get those kinds of guys, and I really don't fault women for wanting rich men because I feel because we live in a really poor society where people are not, that's not a good word. We live in a society where a lot of people are struggling. And so if you're a girl and you want to and you want to be like, hey, I want my boyfriend to provide me a decent life, I think that's reasonable. In the same way where I think it's reasonable for a man to want a beautiful woman.
Okay. Talgor for $5 says, speaking as a formal incel here, I can honestly say that most of us are just really sad and unmotivated. I'd be shocked if anyone could militarize that.
Yeah,
That's
that was my
interesting.
point. Yeah.
Right.
That's part of the reason why I think that like if you're an incel, you should get out and do stuff. Part of the reason why like just the whole go to the gym thing. it's getting up and leaving the house that starts helping right away. Like within
It's
like the
Right.
first week or two, like the
yeah.
routine of getting up, getting dressed, getting out of the house, that makes people feel better about themselves than waking up, staying in bed, messing on your phone. Maybe you get out of bed, and if you do, you go to the couch and play video games. Like that is that kind of lifestyle is not going to be conducive to having good mental health. You have to get up, go out and feel like you're doing something. That kind of stuff really does matter. And I think that it is, I don't think enough people focus on the the just the process of getting up and doing those normal, hygiene things helps keep you out of that kind of funk that people can get into.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's,
Yeah.
I just realized an issue in this argument that I should have thought of this earlier. When this video wasn't about self-identified incels, when I'm saying the incel revolution, I don't mean people who call themselves incels, because that demographic, I agree with everything you guys say. The people who self-identify as incels, they're not going to accomplish anything.
Hmm.
What I'm talking about is, imagine you're a software engineer who goes to the gym once a week. You are in the higher part of the population in talent, but that guy's still probably an incel. Because being a software engineer, you're pulling in six figures, but it's not like a Chadley job. Or imagine you're the manager of a Walmart at age 26. That's actually a pretty high responsibility, high skill job, but it's not a sexy job. And so I agree with everything people have said about the self-identified incels, but beyond the people who self-identify as incels, there's this giant demographic of people who are de facto incels but don't identify as it.
Hmm. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around a lot of these conversations because, as a like basically mid-range millennial, the dating situation and the social situation is just so
Yeah,
vastly different
it's
for the Zoomers now that I have no experience with any of the things that are kind of being discussed at the moment.
I have two
I,
nephews I have one that's 15 years old and I have one that's 19. And to my knowledge, neither of them have had a girlfriend. And, and,
Hmm.
and I don't speak, I don't
That is
talk to
interesting.
them,
Yeah. Yeah.
in depth about their, personal stuff, but I assume they both haven't had any kind of dates either, not just don't have a girlfriend. And now, granted, I don't think that I'm typical, but I wasn't some kind of like Don Juan as a kid either, right? Like I wasn't like it wasn't like, oh, I'm in a famous band when I was a teenager, right? Like I was just a normal kid that played guitar and was trying to figure stuff out. And, I had girlfriends when I was, 15, 16, 17. It was normal for me to date girls and go out and hang out with girls and stuff. And I don't think that's normal anymore.
Is the rate of like young girls and young boys who have sex or not have sex, is it the same? Is there some mass like number of
Yeah,
women having
so
sex that
I
men
I know
aren't?
the numbers on this.
Hmm.
In 2008, 8% of men in their 20 and from ages 18 to 30 were virgins. Now we're hitting up against a third. And so
Hmm.
these numbers just went up astronomically. And you look at the invention of the iPhone is the big event where the numbers just go crazy. And the number of sexlessness among young women um, have just they've like doubled, but it's not as bad as men's going through the roof. And the normal Gen Z situation is there's one guy who has multiple women, but it's all in a situationship where most of Gen Z's in situationships in which there's this one guy and he's in situationships with these girls where the girls won't ask the question, are we dating? Because then he'll get rid of her and get another girl. And so they don't know that he's with other girls because they met through the app, but they pretend he isn't. So that there's a lot of coping going on here. And so these women
Hmm.
share these guys without knowing it. And then a large group of guys have no dates. And so there are twice as many single young men as single young women due to this, where, in my opinion, situationships are significantly more common among Gen Z than actual relationships. We've only got 5 minutes left, so what are your final questions for me?
Um, I don't know. I haven't really been looking.
Get on it, Sitch.
I know, I know. It was funny. It's not really a question, but hearing what we're talking about in like earlier you're talking about the lack of a moral code in terms of like people living up to the framework that they're espousing. It's interesting because I see that the red pill phenomenon is basically the same thing in that it's this failure of the moral code. Because
Yeah.
if the movement was really about cultivating meaningful relationships and trying to help young men, they should be trying to tear down the Andrew Tates of the world, who are basically the
Yeah.
ones that are helping screw them over. And instead, they're trying to emulate them, which kind of makes it feel like, well, you're not really wanting to create a meaningful relationship or finding meaning. You just want to bang a bunch of girls and kind of like fulfill this naturalistic primal evolutionary desire to fuck a bunch of women.
Yeah.
Andrew Tate sells maximizing the world that we live in for like
Yes,
the
yes, yeah,
1% of men that are capable of it. And he
Yes.
takes advantage of young men that join the war room or whatever to help and what they do is they help promote Andrew Tate stuff, and that's supposed to help them. It's like it's like a Ponzi scheme kind of. You get in
Multi-level
there, you help
marketing
Andrew Tate.
scam. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched. So I don't know, remember who made the video, but there was someone that made a video. They joined the war room and were basically, just trying to find out what was going on in there. And it's basically just helping Tate promote Andrew Tate, and so he's selling an idea that only the most, only a tiny fraction of guys could ever do, and he's doing it by maximizing modernity
Yeah.
but still selling traditionalism, right? He's selling masculinity in the modern world and how to be masculine in the modern world, which is just taking advantage of all of the blind spots of feminism, you know?
true,
Great point.
true.
And one of the interesting things is that you can only motivate people by appealing to cynicism today, where the left, although they are very idealistic, they're also a fundamentally cynical ideology, and that I think power
Sure.
motivates absolutely everything. And
Hmm.
with Andrew Tate, he is a very fundamentally cynical ideology of just get rich and get laid. New right is becoming very cynical, and we've
Hmm.
lost the ability to appeal to any higher values. And if you try that, you're just called cringe. If you
And
talk about love or duty or honor or God, it's just you're laughed at, and that
you
scares
look at the
me.
way that people treat the Daily Wire, like the
Yeah,
Daily Wire or not, they are actually the ones transmitting a traditional, traditional, but still what would be considered a mainstream type of lifestyle. And they get dunked on
yeah,
by everybody, you know?
yeah, exactly.
It is interesting how the new right is kind of so far away from conservatism and like what we would classically think of as the right.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
guess last thing I'll ask you before you leave is kind of interesting. Very original for Five Canadian says Google Orwell's young woman quote for why there are mostly
Oh
women at
yeah,
these
I've read
protests
that.
like Columbia. And the quote was, I think it's from 1984, where he says, it was always the women above all the young ones who were the most bigoted adherents of the party, the swallowers of slogans, the amateur spies, and the nosers out of unorthodoxy. Why do you think it is that, like, when we look at the Colombian protests and these things, that you just see a lot of young women mostly
Yeah.
doing all this stuff?
Um, that's a great question. And one of the things that I'd compare that to is that back in the pre-industrial world, pre-modern world, one of the most popular date options was taking a girl to a public hanging, where like if you were in the 16th century, 17th
Yeah.
century, it was known as a really good date to take a girl to watch a criminal get beheaded or hanged.
Hmm.
And it was common knowledge that young women were the demographic that liked watching that the most.
That was
And
like pre-true crime.
yeah, exactly. And um, so if you're a young woman, your genetic chances are much safer than a man. And so crypto is 95% men. WhatIfAltHist, 95% men.
Isn't
Strategy.
like YouTube like 75% men?
Yeah, yeah, it's like really high. Everything that's about breaking the system to get an advantage is a male trait. Women will survive no matter what. And so
Yeah.
women compete over who is the most socialized and who accepts the values of the society the hardest. And so that's what wokeness is, where wokeness is this virtue signaling of I can be more indoctrinated than you can. Thus, I'm a more sensitive, permitted, whatever person. And um, and so that's kind of what's happening, where women will virtue signal, no, I have the values of our society to a higher degree than you do. And there's less of a feedback loop to reality, because for young men, if things go wrong, you'll die. For women, there's less of that. And so every political crisis, this is a really based thing to say, but you can tell who's culturally in charge based off who young women like politically. If young women like a political position, you know what that is, the political position that's in social dominance. And another thing is that women are weaker physically, so they'll support strength because they are already exist in a position of physical danger.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because I'd be curious if like the right makes a big resurgence if the young women are going to switch. Because part of it,
Yeah,
because I agree with like a lot of what you're saying, but I think part of it is also just that because the kind of like bureaucratic mindset that exists in corporate America and also is sort
yeah,
of the base level which wokeness operates. These are all systems designed to basically maximize the safetyism, the comfort level,
yeah.
and the tools and trades in which women socially interact with each other. And so it would make sense that in protests that are basically advocating for a feminine perspective is going to be dominated by young
Yeah.
women specifically.
In most eras of history, young women are significantly more conservative than men. Because imagine you go back to the 18th century, 19th century, young women are the ones who attend the church more, the conservatives are the stable faction. And ironically, atheism and liberalism were considered masculine policy. They were considered masculine political positions in the 18th and 19th and early 20th centuries, where conservatism was seen as more feminine. And so you have records of religious leaders in that time period saying it's annoying, or I don't like how like women are the ones who attend the church the most because doesn't make me look manly.
That yeah, I just want to say before you go, because this is actually very interesting. Because yeah, you're right. Like usually we see like in a lot of religious ceremonies, it's the women that seem to be dominating it. And it's interesting that you're saying that for a lot of history, women were viewed as a more conservative because I hear constantly from sort of like the dissident right side of things is that they tend to blame women having the ability to vote and be political as kind of leading us down the downfall away from conservatism in the first place.
So the irony is that women were given the vote 100 years ago because they were expected to be a conservative voting bloc. But you have uppercase and lowercase conservatism, upper big letter conservatism
Yeah.
is ideology. Small letter conservatism is I don't like change. And women are always small level conservative until it becomes the consensus. One of my favorite books is Sex and Power and History by Amaury de Réaucourt. And it's a history of how the relations between men and women have changed the course of history. And so we look at how certain civilizations have treated the sexes, and then from that, what the result of that was for that society's survival. And the point he makes is that women are lowercase conservative. They support the status quo until the revolution gets rolling, and then they'll become the most radical adherents to the revolution. And so women will support the consensus, and once the consensus changes, they will change the consensus. But giving women the vote over the 20th century has moved the needle to the left because politics became about increasing the economic stability of children and the family. So welfare, that's stability for women in case they have issues with their husband or they don't want to get married. Welfare goes to disproportionately unmarried women. You have various bureaucratic procedures to increase safetyism. And so women were brought into voting 100 years ago because they were expected to be a conservative voting bloc. But then over time, as the left became less about revolution and more about bureaucratic safetyism, women pulled the country to the left.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thanks for coming on, Rudyard.
Thanks.
So
It was a pleasure to talk to all of you.
Yeah.
Cheers, bud.
We're going to read some super chats if you want to stick around, Phil. So
follow your
dream. I'm going to stick around until my food gets here. It's on the way. So
Take care, Rudyard. Have a good day.
You too.
Okay. The K-Vit Can't Shatter for 100. I'm not sure what symbol that is. It says completely off topic, but can you please tell Phil that I absolutely love him, his beliefs, and more importantly, all that remains. Keep making good music. So there
I
you go. Look
appreciate
at
it.
that.
New music coming very, very, very soon. Very soon. Very, very soon. I just can't announce it yet. But like
There you go.
very
Yeah, and if
soon.
you missed it, you did an announcement for a big tour at the beginning of the stream.
Yeah, we are going to be on tour with Megadeth and Mudvayne starting in August. It's going to be August and September. I think like 35 dates nationwide across the U.S. No dates in Canada or in Mexico, just the United States right now. So
Oh, and
keep
there
a
you go.
lookout.
Oh, and that symbol is the Indian rupee. So there you go.
Ah,
Nice. And the KVIT pant shatter for another 100 rupees says also behind Silence and Solitude is Based ATR album, along with
wow.
Unholy Confessions. The title track were songs that I started with to learn riffing. That's
Awesome. Thank
cool.
you
Look
so
at
much.
that.
That is the little known first All That Remains record that came out in 2002. Most people don't even know that it came out because it was a very quiet, small release. So
Nice.
Wow, a super fan. Look at that.
yeah, definitely. A super fan from India. That's crazy. So
Yeah,
that's
look at
awesome.
that.
Appreciate it.
Blonde for $5 says, Phil, I appreciate the advice, but it doesn't always work. Working out made me feel good for like 6 years, but there are circumstances that screwed me.
No, I'm not saying that it is a cure-all for anyone. I'm saying that you're better off doing it than not doing it is the
Yeah,
best thing
yeah.
to say. So
I think what you were saying, Phil, about you need to like go out there. And I think that's kind of relating to what you were saying, Adam, about porn and video games. I think the problem with them, even though I like both, the problem with them is that it drains motivational energy to initiate things and to
Like a
to go out
revolution?
like a revolution, yes, but to just go out there. And that's why, I mean, I feel always it's difficult for me because people have asked in the past, they say like, Sitch, Adam, how do we, meet women? And it's like, okay, I've existed in a world, a very different world than for meeting women than people do nowadays. So I can only kind of relate to that experience. But I don't,
you're telling
and I
me.
understand that like there's dating apps and things are different, but I still would wager that the best way to meet women and to meet people is to find an activity, not just better yourself, but just to find activities out there in the world where you can meet people. Because yeah, you can definitely find people in dating apps, but it's significantly harder. There's also different types of dating apps. Like my understanding is that Tinder is basically not a dating app; it's just a hookup app. But there are other apps out there that are
Christian Mingle,
specifically.
right?
I don't know the
Farmers
names of
only.
all of them, but yeah, fine. There you go. But there are other apps out there that are specifically trying to be not hookup apps. That are specifically trying to be dating apps, and you got to go out there and try to find activities where you'll meet people and kind of meet new friends. And which, as someone myself who's horribly antisocial, introverted, this is like I don't want to do these activities, but that's what you got to do. I think that's to meet people. So,
It's true.
Schmokey, thanks so much for joining the Free Will Seekers, and thank you, J Mac, our surrogate father, for the 50 gifted memberships.
Yeah, welcome new members.
Death by Sloth for 25 months. Thank you so much. Says, I disagree with WhatIfAltHist that the left has no moral code. I think they just have a myopic tunnel vision on the few specific issues they care about. I mean, yeah, I agree. And I said, I don't know that they don't have a moral code. I think it's just that their moral code is so, and again, we shouldn't say left. We should say socialist and leftist. Because left-wing liberals, I think, do have a moral code that we associate with liberalism, where
I
the
don't think that there
leftists
are
and
left-wing liberals. I
socialists.
think liberalism is right-wing inherently. I think you to get out of liberalism, you have to be like, yeah, I don't agree that people should own property. And as soon as you you can be like a liberal that wants to have like a social safety net and stuff like that, but you're still a liberal if you believe in like property rights and the individual comes before the state. But once you cross over into the state and the collective is more important, then you stop being a liberal and then you become a leftist. So I think it's the easiest way to understand it, at least as far as I'm concerned. So
Yeah, I
sorry, I
agree in
had to
terms of
interject
the
there.
term leftist, but in terms of just the terms left, right, everything is sort of like these are like relative positions on a political spectrum that are
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Relative.
relative,
Once you,
I guess, to
yeah,
whatever's going on. So like
fair
for
enough.
most of for most of American history, there was a party that we would consider more the left and a party we consider more the right. They're both operating within the framework of liberalism.
Yes, I agree.
So
Have you
right.
taken the moral foundations test, Phil? I'd be curious to see what your results were.
I think that I might have, and it's pretty libertarian.
We saw Tim Pool We saw his results because he shared them on
which were
his,
super weird and interesting.
they were very, very conservative. We were like, whoa.
Yeah, because he was super
I,
high in purity, which was very fascinating. Because mostly libertarians aren't very high in purity.
Yeah, they're very
So,
low in purity. Yeah.
yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see. JMac for $50. Thanks so much. Our circuit father JMac says an incel revolution makes a lot of sense logically. I myself have felt pretty revolutionary during particularly long dry spells in my youth. For those poor souls needing an outlet, go to the gym and lift. There you go.
It's not a bad idea.
I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly, JMac.
And also, I wonder how all the sex robots is going to change everything too.
What was that? Sex bots?
Well, look,
the sex bots, yeah.
I didn't want to bring that up, but I thought I was
know.
thinking about this before the show because the problem of relationships civilizing men still needs to be solved. And I was like, oh, that's easy to solve with the sex bots. You just make the sex bots in control, right? like the sex bots.
That's not a good idea.
Look, if you behave, you get the sex. It's like a video game, right?
I guess. But
if you don't behave,
the government's going to control the sex bots.
Very similar to reality too, though, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's very.
It's funny. I was going to say, like, we're entering a really brave new world, so it's hard for me to make these predictions of what the future is going to look like. But you're saying, you're advocating for like a whole new brave new world. Like, government is controlling, the vagina on your sex robots. So unless you're a good citizen, it doesn't open up for you.
Yeah. Look, it's the ultimate social credit system, right?
Oh no. Yeah, there you go. That's what they'll do in China. It'll be terrible.
I can't.
Well, I just look, if it ends up in a more civilized society, Phil, how's that a bad thing? I mean, you'll all be manipulated by your supermodel robots, but
I just hate the manipulation part. But I mean,
I know
manipulation on some degree. So.
Look, Phil, it disgusts me too. That kind of manipulation, but it might make the relationships more interesting.
There you go.
Oh, God.
Sketch for $10 says the sane righties who say drain the swamp still believe in the function of the establishments, but want the people in them gone. Lefties want the whole system destroyed. I agree with you that there's something that's kind of interesting, which is that it seems like the right generally, they're the ones that are trying to kind of defend the system. The left is generally trying to change the system. And we kind of have this weird situation where the left has such hold of the mainstream that the right wants to destroy or change out the institutions, but the left has a natural inclination to want to destroy it or change it anyway. So really there's really no massive energy to defend the institutions from any force, really.
That's why, like, the liberal, like, when you start saying, no, hold on, we're liberal, it's like, Dev gets a lot of crap because he says, he's a liberal and stuff. And that's really what you want to do.
Yes.
Like, liberalism is is like the foundation of our society, right? Like, you need to focus on things that are actually liberal. And I don't understand why Carl thinks that, like, that liberalism leads to socialism. I don't get that, but especially when liberalism kind of focuses on the liberty of an individual and socialism is the collective. But I mean, I guess whatever he says,
I don't get it either. As you know,
I love Carl to death, so I'm not gonna, I would never dog him out. I think he's great. I love him, but I just don't understand it. But I'm sure he would explain it to me, though.
Well, I'm sure you've heard our long debates about.
Yes, I've heard them, and I've enjoyed both of you, of all of the takes, but I still don't quite agree with Carl. So.
Brian for $10 says the way I see it is that the left tends to have goals and creates whatever the means to get there, where the right has a moral system and so as to create the goal to fit those means generally. I don't know if I agree with that. I think that the left is more goal oriented and the right is more system oriented in terms of just their thinking.
I think that
makes sense.
Because I think the right is more comfortable with the outcomes just so long as you use the constitutional system, and the right is more likely to say, well, we don't like the outcome, but we use the constitutional system, so we are going to try to change the outcome through the same system, whereas the left is like, we don't like the outcome, break the system to get the outcome we like, which is why there's so much talk on the left of expand the court or go around the amendments that are in the Constitution, et cetera. They're far more quick to say, forget about what the Constitution says, forget about what the Bill of Rights says. We're going after the goal.
Yeah, this
I
is
think
the ends justifies the means
Yeah.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely think that the right can, like, in times and have people that operate in that same way too, then justify the means. But I think generally, or I guess overall, like from a kind of statistical lean back perspective, I I would wager the reason for that is because the right generally has a much higher reverence for order. And so there's an idea, kind of what you were saying, Phil, where like the right would be more inclined to be like, let's create a system that's going to create like a rule set kind of to live by. And this is, where religion obviously comes in, where the left is more like, we're not really interested in a system. We're interested in an outcome that we think is a good outcome. So,
yeah.
All
right,
Brian
guys,
Bishop,
I just got a notification. My food is here. So I'm
Okay.
well, thanks for coming on, Phil. It's great talking
Thank
to
you guys for having me. I appreciate everybody in the chat. Thank you guys for checking our stuff out. If you want to check out the tour, it's Megadeth, Medvein, All That Remains, going to go on sale on Friday. You can get tickets at megadeth.com or allthatremainsonline.com. So
if you got links, I'll put them in the description for you, Phil.
I will send them shortly.
Yeah. Okay. Take care, man.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. See you guys.
See you.
Bye.
Brian Bishop for $5 says, love the lineup today. Here's some money, you handsome devils. Well, thank you, Brian. Stug for $5 says, if you were a Caucasian gang member of a primarily African-American gang in Los Angeles and you never had sex, you would be a white blood cell.
Okay.
That's pretty good. Patter of heads for 10 months says, Sitch, the Marxist takeover of college is a lot longer than 8 years in the making. Cultural Marxism is a cis story, came out in 2008, 16 years ago. Yeah, I understand that there's been so I think the way it worked is that there has been obviously Marxist infiltration into a lot of academia for a lot longer than 8 years ago, but it was more localized in like specific, generally sociological, anthropological schools. It wasn't completely everywhere. I know that when I went to college in the late 2000s, in the early 2010s-ish time period, I guess it was the late 2000s, I didn't experience a single drop of Marxism in any class I ever took, ever, in anything I ever took. Now I didn't take any sociology classes, but in other classes I took, there was no Marxism. I didn't see anything Marxist-y on campus at any point. I didn't see anything woke on campus at any point. So now it seems to be basically have, bled into everything. So obviously there's been some kind of change that occurred.
Social contagion. It was the internet.
I don't know. Like that, I mean, that's definitely part of it. It's definitely part of it.
So much. Like you're constantly pointing out socialists and communists and that kind of thing. And maybe it's me, but I guess I don't see it as a giant threat. It's too cringe to be a threat. But maybe I could be delusional.
Well, the problem is it's still, to me, it's still murky as to what the future of the young millennial Zoomer socialist will look like. I'm not confident that they'll just grow out of it, because that's not what we've been seeing we've seen all the corporations basically become, sucked into the DI stuff, and
to make money, which is the opposite of
I understand
socialism. Yeah.
Right. And so the question is, will this stuff, it's entirely possible that 4 years from now, all this stuff goes away because people get bored with it.
It's like a big
definitely possible.
Signal.
Right. I have no clue. That's what I'm just saying. But it's to me, it's unclear as to what's going to happen to all this socialist energy. Is it going to dissipate, or is it going to continue and we're going to have to deal with it? Or maybe it'll just be like this weird generational thing where like the generation after Zoomers fucking hate all the Zoomers that are socialists and they're super cringe. And the older generation from Zoomers hate all of them because they think that they're super cringe. I don't know.
But you do think income inequality is an issue, right? Like we can't have people who are struggling. We can't have people who
but that's what's interesting is
they'll
that
never be able to own a home.
The sort of woke socialism that we're talking about, they don't even give a shit about income inequality. It's all race and gender oriented and sexual orientation oriented. They're like so far removed from class issues.
Yeah, that's kind of what makes me think that it's not really an issue, because the thing that I worry about is when material conditions get horrible for people, turn to socialism. I think that's like how it works.
Right.
And as long as we have elections that people aren't making tangible moves towards socialism, we have a bunch of corporations that are like, getting rich, basically virtue signaling socialism. I mean, I think that's like, that to me is acceptable.
Well, I guess to be clear, when I say socialism and Marxism, I'm really saying cultural Marxism.
Right.
Because that's really what we're talking about. Yeah. We're not really talking about economic Marxism.
We're talking about identity politics, which is cancer and should be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I agree. Okay. Well, that's more clear, obviously.
Right.
When I think of socialism,
I just don't like to use that term because you get hit with the Nazi stick. So.
Yeah. This should be a better term for it, but yeah, I don't necessarily work like when I hear socialism, I think economic conditions. That's what I think. But you're right. So much now, it's not about economic conditions. It's about the oppressor-oppressed lens, which is just toxic. I mean, that's completely creating racism and conflict all across society, independent of people's economic conditions. Yeah.
True. Hawk Smash, thank you for the $2. Libertarian Sasquatch for $5 says, meh, this incel stuff seems like a lot of cope to me. The ones I've talked to seem to want Cinderella to settle for them while doing better themselves. Oh no, while doing nothing to better themselves. Says Libertarian Sasquatch.
Yeah, look, I think some of that could be going on as well. Like, it's just some people have really kind of unrealistic expectations, and that seems to be interfering with their ability to get a girlfriend. So, but there's problems. I think, yeah. People want the kind of girlfriend that they want, especially if, and if that's unattainable, that sucks.
Mark Twain's Revenge for the 50 gifted memberships. Thank you so much, Mark Twain's Revenge. It's incredibly generous of you. Blonde for $10 says, I worked at a store one time. This lady started screaming her boyfriend was abusing her to get attention. I stepped in to intervene. This guy could have beat me up. After the call showed up, she screamed she loved him. That's awful.
You see, look.
It's awful, yeah.
I think the hero is the guy who didn't step up, but maybe I'm the bad guy.
Well, there's something too, I mean, going back to sort of the whole like watching someone get mugged and stuff. I agree with Phil that like having, like Daniel Penny and people like that get arrested, that definitely disincentivizes men to basically involve themselves in these situations.
Yeah, I agree with that part.
But definitely. I think there's only like 5 to 10% of the population anyway that would ever intervene in these situations most of the time.
Yeah.
Well, let me add a little asterisk there. In a large city. I mean, because obviously if you're in a smaller area where there's kind of a more communal attitude, people will be more likely to be engaged and step in because they'll actually see the person who's getting attacked or harassed as like a person that they know or part of their community. Where if you're in like a bigger city area, you don't really view strangers as like part of your community. You view them as like a stranger.
Right.
And so it kind of changes the calculation or the emotional weight in terms of like whether you're going to invest your energy to like try to protect someone. But I think there's another issue too, which is that, I've been in multiple situations in my life where like a fight has broken out or is about to break out or something's about to go down. And in all these situations that I've been in, I always look around and I'm the only person who's acting. Everyone else just stands there like just paralyzed. And I think it's just, and it's not because, I don't think it's because they necessarily want to not be involved. I think it's because there's like, it takes a lot of people like a minute, 2 minutes to like process in those situations where they like freeze up. And I think that's like the number one thing when people just kind of stand there and watch someone get mugged, people just freeze up. They don't really know how to react. They're not even thinking. There's not like a conscious thought process going on in their head.
Yeah, I totally agree.
No. But I do think that the 5 or 10% people that would interact do get disincentivized by the Daniel Penny arrests and things of that nature.
In law enforcement and in the military, I mean, you're kind of trained
then to act,
to be reactive in those
right.
situations. And Daniel Penny, I mean, he was military. I think he was a Marine or something.
Yes,
yeah,
100%. Yeah.
So he had the training. Look, I don't have the training to go take out some mugger. I'm gonna get myself killed. So
exactly, yeah.
But if I did have the training and I didn't do it, okay, well, now we're having a conversation. I mean, that's like, the guy who's an Olympic swimmer but doesn't jump in to save a drowning kid. It's like, well, I mean, it's not like you were gonna drown. Like, you might have got your shoes wet, right?
Yeah, and I would hope we could get back. I mean, it would be good if ideally you don't even need to be trained. If all the men on a train would just stand up and grab someone, and each person grabs one limb, you wouldn't need any training, right? But obviously that's not
a collective action problem.
That's not the collective cultural action that exists in our society. I'm not sure if it ever did exist in our society to the extent that people think it did. But
Daniel Penny is, I mean, that guy, the fact that they brought him up on charges is just like crazy. So, I mean, and it just sends a complete wrong message. Like, yeah, it does. It screams a message. Don't get involved. This is the problem with so much of the left, man. They empathize with the criminals because they see the criminals as being oppressed by society. They don't think they would be criminals if it weren't for society taking advantage of them or turning on them. Yeah, right. It's really bad.
I mean, it kind of reminds me of like, in Watchmen, Rorschach's mask is supposed to be made of some material that is based off of a woman. I mean, the material isn't, but that's just for the story. But it's supposed to be like the dress that was made for this woman called Kitty. What's her last name? Genovese. I don't know how to say her last name. Who was a real life person who was basically killed in New York, and it was like there were like all these people, I believe, that saw the murder and heard about it, but no one really did anything. And it's kind of like there's this whole thing about like the bystander effect, and that when there's like in a situation, people always assume someone else is going to do something, but they don't. And that's why, like, very often, if you've ever taken any of those training courses for first aid, they always say like if someone needs first aid, you need to point to someone directly and say, "Hey, you call 911." Because if you just say call 911, like no one will do it because everyone's going to assume someone else did it. And that was in the 60s. So that was obviously, like pre-woke stuff. Ostracy for $5 says, I have the solution to the revolution. Join the Helldivers today and support managed democracy. There you go. Now, Lucer Zoma for 5 Canadian says, smash that like button if you use chopsticks. Wow. Terrible. Smash that like button if you use forks like a civilized American. Okay.
I don't want to get involved with our like button. I don't want our like button to be dependent upon the war between forks and chopsticks.
Ryan O for $20. Thank you so much. Says a question on TikTok making the rounds is, would you rather come across a bear in the woods or a man in the woods? Women, for the most part of the app, said a bear. A lot of videos talking about it, some good and a lot of cringe. I mean, well, first of all, I guess, if you're going to be super nerdy and autistic about it, the question would be what kind of bear, right?
Right. A murderous bear with a taste for human blood.
Yeah, I mean, I would, even though it's obviously, human, the most dangerous animal, I would prefer to come across a person in the woods than a bear. I think I'd have a better shot. Usually, unless the person has a gun, you would have a better shot, dealing with a person than a bear that wants to kill me, on average.
That's so ridiculous. So, I can't believe you would say that.
You think you'd have a better shot dealing with a bear?
Look, the bear doesn't want to rape her, doesn't want to rape the woman.
This guy wants to eat you. What are you talking about?
There's a potential of sexual assault involved that is not involved with the bear. Like the bear is the obvious right choice. You're out in the middle of nowhere?
Okay, wait a minute.
Some creepy dude? Come on.
Yeah, but you think okay. You're not thinking about this the way that I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it in terms of if there's a bear and a person, right? And I'm assuming both, even though I don't know if this is hypothetical, assuming that both of them want to do you harm. Okay. I feel like I have a better shot of getting away from the person than the bear.
Are you saying that the bear wants to sexually assault the woman?
Yes, Adam. That's what I'm saying.
Where are you taking this?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Sitch? I don't like where this is going.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying the bear wants to sexually assault the woman. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, haven't you played Baldur's Gate 3? Obviously, the bear wants to have intercourse, Adam.
Look.
Anyway.
If that's the case, maybe you go with the smaller guy.
Right. Okay.
Can you imagine going back to civilization until I was sexually assaulted by a bear?
Mm-hmm.
That's gotta hurt.
That's gotta be pretty bad.
What if it's a gay bear?
You would prefer to face down the bear, Adam, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it depends. Like, is the bear in a bad mood?
Okay.
What if it just smoked a big fat blunt? What if it's hanging out with Blunty Fly?
What if it's Winnie the Pooh, right?
Yeah, look, what if it's a cuddly koala bear?
There you go. What if it's
those things are always high anyway?
Right. What if it's a panda and just wants to like roll around and stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, look.
Okay.
It might be you might have fun.
Right.
Don't say no to fun, Sitch, okay? Go.
When the grizzly bear eats you alive, you might have fun. Yeah, exactly. Adam Robot for 60 bucks says, "Hey meow." Adam is soy.
Hey meow.
That's class. I don't know. Adam wants to fight a bear. I don't know how soy that is.
Hey meow.
Yeah.
That's good.
Ostracy for $5 says, "Adam, bears are omnivores. You don't want to be eaten by a bear. They don't kill you before they start eating you." That's true.
Okay.
The one guy
making bears sound dangerous here.
Yeah,
I've been to the zoo. I've seen bears. They're not
okay. They're pretty cuddly.
They're not so bad.
The one guy Toad for 13 months says, "Love the streams. Always a reliable place for reasonable discussion on any topics. Don't forget to hit the like button." Thank you.
Why, thank you. That's what we try to do here.
Blonde for $2 says, "Ask Dev how black-pilled I am at a noise empty club."
Wow.
There you go. There you go. Matrix 070112 for 100 Kazarkazarks says, "Everyone is fat and lazy, and even have-nots have a decent amount. Nobody is starting a revolution. West is simply going to fall slowly apart." I mean, I don't know. I don't think the West is going to fall apart, but I agree. No one's going to start a revolution. It's hard for me to perceive the mechanism in which the revolution occurs exactly, especially once we move away from the next election, if that doesn't end in something disastrous. So.
Yeah, I think, things are not that bad. But thinking they're really bad is gives a lot of people solace.
Yes.
Makes them think, "Oh,
well, maybe because if you feel things are bad, either makes you like it's like, oh, see, everyone has it bad, not just me. Or as you were saying, it makes or it can make you feel like things are happening to you aren't so bad, which is definitely a real phenomenon. Austin Unruh for $20. Thank you. Says, "I think the internet and feminism has made the incel problem bad. Dating apps expand the dating pool of women, and feminism extended their worth above realistic standards." I would agree with that 100%.
Some of that is probably going on.
And also, and also, Phil was talking about this thing, which is definitely prevalent now, which is, women can gain social capital by basically mocking failed dating attempts that aren't like that, like aren't creepy or assaulty or anything, but just like a failed date attempt can be mocked pretty heavily when, if you look back in the day, the pre-internet day, there's a lot of women who you talk to and say, "Oh, how did you guys get married?" And the woman be like, "Oh, well, he asked me out for like a month and I finally gave in." And then they're married for like 20 years, right? And that kind of attitude is not really tolerated now. It's like, oh, if you're pursuing a woman and she says she's not interested and you try to pursue a little bit more, you're like a sexual assaulter, you're a creep,
Guys, you got to wear them down, man. That's a time-honored tradition.
It's weird. I mean, but that seems to be the way it sort of works for a lot of relationships. But
yeah, look, that's not a bad thing. But I get that some women are gonna shame that kind of thing.
Right.
But for every woman that's gonna shame a guy for doing that kind of thing, another woman is gonna end up marrying him. So.
Well, that used to be the case. I don't know what's like right now. So.
Okay.
Antelope for $2 says, "What do you mean when you said we aided Kurds for woke reasons?" Did Rudyard say that? I must have missed that. I don't know what he means by
aided the
that.
Kurds for woke reasons. Interesting perspective.
That is, yeah. Bob Van Gogh for $20 says, are men who date or marry women 10 years younger than themselves going to be safe during the incel revolution?
What are we going to
There you
get?
go.
Are we going to get in
Depends.
trouble or something?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Drew the Dogman for 17 months says, hey, I got an idea. Let's let them vote. Who? The incels? They can't vote. What do you mean? I don't know who we're talking about.
If a guy looks 10 years younger than he is it fair for him to marry a woman that's 10 years younger than him? Just a question.
Oh, that's just a random question that you're asking. You're throwing out there, Adam? For no reason, particularly?
Just a random question.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to get anyone in trouble.
Current provider says, hey.
The Bible says to divide your age in half and add 7, right?
Oh, really? Is that that?
It does.
I think the Bible says that.
It does, yeah.
Current for $5 says, might be a selfish request, but would you be able to unprivate the protester compilation? I have some friends that would benefit from saying it. Well, it's unlisted. It's not private. It's unlisted. So we could put a link actually to it in the stream if you want. So
yeah,
maybe we'll
do that.
Yeah, we can just put a link to it.
Sure.
Zero for $2 says femsplaining is called feminism natural 20. Oh, it is. That's true. Blonde for $5 says, well, that's what I'm saying. Well, that's what I'm saying due to circumstances outside of my control. All I could do is work out. I couldn't, and I still can't go out and meet people. I'm sorry to hear that. I wish I could give people better advice, but I'm just not tuned into the Zoomer experience now.
What was a super chat again? Let me see. What is it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Due to circumstances outside of my control, all I could do is work out. I couldn't, and I still couldn't go out and meet people.
So you can't work out? Like, look, if you're handicapped or something like that, I totally get it. I totally understand that. Yeah. Well, there are challenges that, like Phil said, like it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve every problem. So,
Saul and Dre for 5 months says, I've been taking my dog to dog park and gotten into Gunpla. I've seen a more positive outlook on myself and meeting people. It's a start. Well, that's great. I don't know what Gunpla is, unless you mistype something. But
Gunplay?
that's it. Gunplay, maybe Gundam play. I don't know. But I mean, that is a hack for a lot of women. Is like dogs. Putting a dog in your profile picture, taking your dog to the dog park. Like a lot of women, they see a guy with a dog and they're like, "That's a trustworthy fellow."
Yes.
So, Gunpla is Gundam plastic models. Oh, well, there you go.
Oh, those are awesome.
Time for Jack to let a rip for $5 says, quote, listening in my car to Alt-Hist describe this Phil Labonte guy during the future Civil War. Man, he sounds like a real jerk. Norm McDonald. There you go. Brian for $5 says, what's the difference between system-oriented and a moral structure in your view? I see them as synonyms. So system-oriented in terms of that, I think system-oriented versus goal-oriented, or would be the goal-oriented person says, I want a goal, right? I want a goal where everyone is equal and happy. And a system-oriented is like, I want to create a system that will create fair results. So they're both moral systems, right? So if you believe like, oh, if you're, I guess how to word this, like, so essentially if you're a person who's like, oh, my moral goal is essentially to create like the utopian world where everything is equal, that's like a goal-oriented moral system. But if your moral system is like, you don't necessarily think that that's possible, that utopian idea is possible. So you're more focused on creating a system that's just going to create like the best results possible. So you're like, well, I think we need a system or society that creates things as, orderly and manageable and fair as possible. Does that make sense?
Well, what you're trying to create is a system that seems to treat everyone fairly and also promotes behavior that has outcomes where people are thriving, or you create an environment where people can be happy and healthy and economically successful. That's what you're trying to do. Like
Sure.
if you could create a system that makes everybody happier but has terrible outcomes that, you know, it doom society to ruin. Obviously, you don't want that system. You know, when we're talking, this is the argument that a lot of people make when we talk about the sex robots and the cool video games and how, well, you know, fuck it, who cares? Right? What's so bad about that? They're like, society's going to fall apart, right? Sitch and Adam, don't you know? The birth rates are going to plummet. Humanity's going to be snuffed out. They're basically saying the outcome is going to be horrible. I mean,
right,
we
but I'm
can
just saying in
contest
terms
that,
of
but
right. I just meant, does it make sense? Or I'm trying to differentiate between a goal-oriented idea and a system-oriented idea.
right. I'm yes, yeah, and you should
Okay.
make the distinction between the two. I'm only pointing out that there is, like, you can't just focus on one or the other. There is, the two are kind of wrapped up together
No,
to some
they
extent.
are.
Yeah,
They are, but I guess I think that some people, they are, like any goal-oriented person is going to end up creating a system to try to create that goal,
yes,
you know.
yeah,
And in people that are system-oriented, they're still working towards a goal. But I do think where the primary focus is does change the outcome and can change the outcome. And I think that's kind of the big problem with socialism, is that socialism is primarily a goal-oriented idea that's kind of working backwards to create a system that's ludicrous to match this
to reach
goal
that
that will
goal.
not work. This
Totally
utopian
agree.
idea. Yeah.
Totally agree. It's got to be balance. And
Right.
the socialists focus too much on the goal. Even, and this is like the breaking point for me, because sooner or later somebody comes out and adopts the ends justify the means. They're like,
Sure.
look, the only way we're going to get there is if we adopt this ends justifies the means mentality. And the next thing you know, they're like a bunch of baby killers out there and stuff. Right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Nomad for $10 says, look, once Scarlett Johansson's sex robot comes out, humanity has lost and won at the same time. LOL. Great conversations from everyone, guys. S class is best class and A team reigns supreme.
Woo!
There you
go. I mean, I'm wondering if there's going to be some kind of OnlyFans model, where, and not model as in person, but business model where the OnlyFans person is like licensing their likeness for a robot. Will that be a thing? Can you just steal someone's likeness for a robot?
Well, yeah,
Could
I mean,
it
that's
be
the
a
question is, can you
Scarlett
do it without
Johansson?
their, well, I guess it depends. I would imagine you can't model a sex robot after Scarlett Johansson without her permission, though they're going to do it. And it's going to be an interesting legal challenge, right? So,
well, look, if you're out and you are Scarlett Johansson, there's some guy like loving up on a Scarlett Johansson robot. I mean, that's gonna be weird, right?
sure. Though I don't think they're going to be, I think the way it's going to work is that people are going to have kind of like a robot that has like the approximate shape of like a woman. And you have your little like Apple Google Glass that kind of just projects whatever you want them to look like.
Come on,
Yeah.
Sitch, get out of here.
You don't think why not?
Well, they already have those real dolls that are supposedly pretty much like a, like a real woman anyway.
No, but what I'm saying is like to build a robot, because guys are going to want to be able to change it. And so it's like, okay, do you want to spend 20 grand on your robot that looks like one person and you can never change it, or 20 grand on your robot that can look like whoever you want it whenever you feel like it?
I mean, it's an interesting dilemma.
So that's what I'm saying, right? Yeah. So I don't know.
That's funny.
Val Van Gogh for $5 says, quote, my hypothesis is that Professor Dawkins is not just an atheist, he is a Christian atheist. Molebug 2007, the correct predictions keep coming. I mean, I think when I looked this up, I don't know if it was 2007, but I know that I found something from like 2010 where Dawkins was calling himself a Christian atheist back then. So I don't know if that's like a prediction or just something people just didn't know about. Joshua Colhero for 10 months. Thank you. says, during my undergrad 2005 to 2010, I had a professor unironically implore us to be social justice warriors and to see it all now. Really? And they use that phrase in 2010? I didn't even think that phrase was around. That's interesting. Nomad for $5 says, scratch off Scarlett Johansson for my last message. I meant Sydney Sweeney. Thank you, Oshacy, for your research. There you go.
Sydney Sweeney? Oh, that's the actress everyone's losing their minds over.
That's the big titty lady everyone's pointing to now. Colin Yerman for $20 says, you guys are killing me with the cultural Muslim stuff. I'm culturally Catholic because it's what my family is. Traditions I grew up with, prayers, holidays, etc. Not because I want Jesus to guide culture. Maybe Chank means this. Well, wait, when we said, I'm confused because when you said cultural Christian, none of us said that Jesus would guide culture. We were saying is that when I thought I explained this like pretty explicitly. When I hear someone say that they're culturally Christian, what I think they mean is that they're essentially in favor of Western liberal democracy. And it's just that those cultures have had dominant Christian religions, or predominantly Christian religions as a majority class, that they kind of get associated with each other. And then also Adam was talking about like also like an idea of the importance of forgiveness and things of that nature. And I said, I didn't know what the heck jank means, because since like using the same framework, if someone means that they're culturally Muslim, to me, that would signal that they're like in favor, even if they don't believe in Islam, they're in favor of the social conservatism of, Muslim countries, which you could be in favor of, but obviously Jank and Hassan are not anywhere in that camp. So that's why I'm saying I don't know what they mean by that. If they just mean that they want to
pray 5 times a day and face Mecca.
Well, they wouldn't do that if you're atheist, but they just mean they want to keep like the food halal or whatever it's called. I mean that I wouldn't say
it tastes better.
Culturally Muslim or something. But.
Oh yeah. But I did a little bit insinuate that people should follow Jesus. So.
Oh, okay.
It's not totally. I mean, forgiveness and turn the other cheek and all that is Jesus. I like hippie Jesus though.
There you go. Federal Burger for 6 months says, both sides are in various stages of forming a mass movement, but both lack effective leaders who actually like the powder kegs, an easy place to be. I guess we'll find out. Stuck for $2 says, if you want a date, you just got to go to an orchard. There you go. Thank you.
An orchard
Sella for $2 says, quote, but Sitch. Hashtag not all protesters are anti-Semitic. Well, I mean, they're not all anti-Semitic. I agree with that.
Just
definitely seems to be a lot of it. Definitely seems to be a lot of them, but yeah. Sure. Fair enough. Even though I know you're being like sarcastic. Brian for $20 says, like, thank you so much. Says, I get you. I guess I just disagree that when someone has a goal but doesn't care about the means, I don't consider that a moral system. I consider a moral system as a structure that limits your means to get said goal. Yeah, I mean, I guess that was what like Rudyard's definition of a moral system is.
Well, I'm just saying,
let me just if I look up moral system, it's a set of principles, rules, ideals, and values that work together to form a person's overall perspective.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean right or wrong. Yeah.
Sure. And I guess what I'm just saying is that even socialists, they have a moral system. They have a set of principles, rules, and ideals and values that work together to form their overall perspective. They definitely do. Now, they can be hypocritical in two ways. They can be hypocritical to our view through liberalism and universalism, which they don't agree with, so they're not hypocritical from their own perspective, or they could be even hypocritical to their own perspective, but that's literally true of every system, every moral system. There's always hypocrites in those systems. So I don't see that as being a uniquely socialist or leftist thing.
Here's where the disconnect is coming. You can say a moral system and think a system for correct behavior, right? Because it's moral behavior. Or you can say a system for behavior, because you understand that some people have moral systems that have different behavior that we would call bad behavior. So it would be contradictory to our moral system.
But, well, no, but that's not what Brian means. Is he's saying that by the definition, by defining a moral system as sort of a framework that limits your behavior, that is incompatible with someone saying that anything to get to a goal, which is true in terms of just like it's like logically those two things can't go together. But I don't think that the majority of socialists have that ideology of like anything to get to a goal necessarily. If that makes sense. I think they are operating on some kind of moral framework. It's just a moral framework that is like we obviously think is terrible.
Right. But they do think doing horrible things to get to that goal is somehow moral.
Yeah, but it depends. Like, so if you had a socialist, you're like, hey, if you talk to one of these neo-Marxian guys, you're like, hey, would you kill every Palestinian in order to have the socialist utopia revolution in America? I don't think most of them would agree to that.
Because it'd be social suicide. But if you asked them privately, they'd be
I don't
like,
think they would. I don't think they would.
Okay.
I think a lot of it is just from I mean, there are definitely people like that. There definitely are people like that. I just don't think it's the majority of them. So that's why I'm just saying to not make these broad statements. I think most of it is just that they have a moral framework system that is hypocritical to our moral framework system and is very apparently hypocritical to our moral framework system.
Right, but inherent in anyone's personal moral, nobody adopts a moral system and thinks this is the wrong way to behave.
I understand.
Yeah, because in the moral system, you're like implied is that it's correct behavior. So when we just say that, when we look at a system that's full of incorrect behavior in comparison to our moral system, what's perceived as incorrect behavior, and we say that's a moral system, it's a moral system that I disagree with, but it is a system for behavior. That's when people say, well, how can you call it a moral system if it has incorrect behavior in it? Right?
Sure.
Because from their perspective, it is correct behavior. They're looking at us and going, we're the ones with the incorrect behavior.
Yes.
Yeah.
Malik for $5 says, can my robot look like Tifa Lockhart?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And yeah. Yeah, that's it.
Fondue for 25 months. Thanks so much for being over 2 years member. Says on vacation, shouldn't be on my phone, but just want to check in. We'll have a lot of streams to catch up on when I get back. Take care till then. Well, thank you so much.
Actual Justice Warrior says, your face is incorrect behavior.
True.
Whose face? Mine or yours?
Your face, Adam.
My face?
Yeah. My face is a static cartoon image.
Okay.
Dr. Dealer for $4 says, my septillion IQ analysis is that I remember Rudyard 10 years from now, after nothing has happened, look him up and find the Civil War is definitely still coming. Trust me, guys. Ask baby Nostradamus if his Tower of Babel channel has successfully predicted any Black Swan events beyond the karmic eventuality of something bad will happen to this good thing eventually. Well, I guess we'll find out. I mean, he did say that if the coming election goes off without something crazy happening, that he'll have to reevaluate his view, and that's definitely like a nearby event. So we'll see.
So much of the world is at war right now. We're just insulated from it here.
Well, I don't know if so much of the world's at war. I don't know if it's different than normal amount of war that goes on all the time. That was just that's just not engaging America, right?
Really?
Yeah. There's always like insane amount of conflicts going on in like Africa, the Middle East and stuff.
It's actually on the rise.
Okay.
There were periods when it was a lot less. And democracy was far more on the rise. Like democracy is kind of waning these days. Yeah.
Gabriel Archange for 10 Canadian says, yesterday I was listening to the very last Nazi speech on the 21st of April. It was Dr. Goebbels speaking, quote, our goal is the freedom of our people and a Reich of social justice in a coming happy future. Really? Did he use that term, social justice?
That's hilarious.
I was interested in kind of looking into Goebbels' ideology because I was kind of looking into it because he had a whole thing where he was trying to talk about how like Nazism is true socialism and Marxism is like fake socialism, which is kind of interesting. I was curious what the reasoning there was, but
that's constantly the goal between the left and the right. Who can you pin the Nazis on?
Yes. Well, I tweeted out that, when I retweeted Brianna, and I was like, fascism is right-wing socialism, and some people get real triggered by that. They get real triggered by that.
Yes.
Libertarians are not right-wing. I'm sorry. It's a different axis. It's a completely different axis.
Don't tell Phil. Shh, Phil. Don't. Shh.
No, Phil agrees with that.
I'm not sure that he does. I think he does think libertarians are right-wing, but
libertarians can be right-wing, but libertarianism, by its definition, is not a right-wing ideology. No. You can have right-wing and left-wing libertarians. Right-wing does not mean less government. That is a meme that got started in America like 30 years ago and is just not accurate. It's not an accurate definition of what a right and a left are. Because obviously, if that was true, then the right would be in favor of allowing women military. To allowing women to be pro-choice, would be against, prayer in school, would be in favor of a small military, would not have would want not to embed moral considerations into the law whatsoever, wouldn't care if people were putting devil statues in their government buildings. You can't, like, conservatism has a high level of caring about purity. You can't have a high level of caring about purity and be libertarian, which is the whole point they brought up when we looked at Tim Pool's his height results and said, oh, that's really interesting. So, but anyway,
Tim Pool's height results.
Jonathan Haidt results.
I know. I'm just playing.
Oh, Haidt, like, yeah, okay. Libertarian Sasquatch for $2 says Rudyard being 22 makes way more sense.
Rudyard's a great guy. We love having him on the show. I consider him a personal friend. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Phil as well, personal friend. Sitch, I'm having second. No, I'm just kidding. A personal friend.
Wow! Look at this.
Anna Kasparian, a personal friend. Look, even Sammy G, I consider a personal friend.
There you go.
So I consider all you guys my personal friends. So this was a great show. Thanks again, Sitch. And I guess we'll talk to you guys tomorrow.
Take care.
Bye-bye.